It's just a black screen until I get right there. Oh, it's faster on the other. Okay. Takes forever on YouTube. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Tano's Hardcore Media. My experiences, reading our video here, etc. They like, comment, etc. Hope everyone's doing well and stuff. I mean, let's get to the nitty here. This is from Fox News and stuff like that. And there's a reason why I say Trump fumbled. You know, why he just really became a blunder with this, because it's going to nip us in the butt later on. Let's go.
I want to ask you about this because as we talk about it, a very fluid, dynamic situation taking place right now. We are now hearing from President Trump that Iran and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire. And I'm going to read this statement to give you a little bit of time to also kind of come to terms with what this means. And this from the president saying, "Congratulations to everyone. It has been fully agreed to by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire in approximately 6 hours from now, when Israel and Iran have wound down and completed their progress, their final missions. For 12 hours, at which point the war will be considered ended. Officially, Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the end of the 12-day war will be saluted by the world. During each ceasefire, the other side will remain peaceful and respectful on the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will. I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war." And this is a war that could have gone on for years, destroyed the entire Middle East, but it didn't and never will. God bless Israel. God bless Iran. God bless the Middle East. God bless the United States of America. God bless the world. This coming in from the president. So, Blaze, that happened very quickly, calling for that ceasefire.
There's a reason why I call this a blunder, because the regime, as long as it's still there, the regime is the threat. And the regime has to be taken out, and I don't know how the news is going to spin it their way, mainstream news. But me seeing this for over 40 years with Iran, and how they also attacked us at Beirut, Lebanon, and have attacked us throughout the Middle East, and through other business ventures. This includes hacking our sites as well, and everything. Interest in Europe as well. You know, Libya used to be a problem, but there's also Iran as well. And this is a problem. I believe that Trump is in this for himself. He wants to say, look what I did, because this is what Trump is all about. Again, there's the reason why I voted for Trump on, like, illegal immigration, stuff like that. But he's very stupid about making stuff about he, himself, and I, you know. And he doesn't see the bigger picture with this regime. It's a terrorist, extremist regime. Iran is. That needs to be totally destroyed. It needs to have a democracy. Women have no rights there, including a lot of men that want to have, you know, their religious views there. If you protest, you could be executed or jailed. And women have to wear their burqas and stuff like that. Some places, they don't have to as much. They have become more relaxed in some places. But there is a lot of places in Iran that still have, you know, have Gestapo-type police that even women goes up to other women, they'll beat them, they'll jail them if they don't wear a burqa and stuff like that, and don't wear Sharia law type of clothing. And there just needs to be a total regime change. The same thing's going to happen again. This is what the enemy does, is that it gives them time to rebuild and to recoup. And they still got over 1,000 ballistic missiles and stuff. They still have a good arsenal. They have that, 800 pounds of uranium missing. I might have to look that up. 60%, which could be a dirty bomb. China has been doing some dirty stuff in Iran while this has been going on. You have movement of dump trucks and stuff, which I saw, days ago. And the problem is the regime. And this is going to be looked at in history as a total blunder for that. And let me see here. I want to ceasefire. Let's go here. Long-term peace, no. Boy, is he really trumping things up. And that was 4 hours ago. I want to see. I know Cutter wanted to get involved in stuff like that. So let's see here.
Chris Cuomo here. Welcome to News Nation, where right and left come to be reasonable. So it seems as though our collective fate vis-a-vis the regime in Iran played out in 3 tweets from President Trump. Each presents a known and an unknown that matter. So let's go through them. The most recent is the best if it is true, because it suggests the least violence. The president tweets, Israel and Iran have agreed to a ceasefire that will begin at midnight tonight in what he is calling now the end of the 12-day war. Let's stop there. Odd the president would call this a war when he doesn't consider his decision to bomb Iran unilaterally an official act of war. But that is a testament to our current state of politics. There is no real logical consistency. It's all advantage all the time. Regardless, if this is true, if there is a ceasefire, and I have to say if,
which there was,
because the president has shown
that
in recent days, let alone always, that he can say things that are not to be taken for the truth of the matter asserted. And neither side has confirmed the ceasefire yet. But, if it happens, this would be the biggest foreign policy achievement for the president in this administration. You can argue with how it came about, whether it were necessary.
This is an important thing. Either side could say, no, I didn't agree to this. No, I didn't say that. And they could totally change their minds. I know things with Trump before, where he said, there's going to be this ceasefire. We're going to have a deal with this for mineral rights, for this, that, for minerals. And that was not the case whatsoever. And you see, it just has a bunch of hyperbole and everything. So,
even legal. But here we are. If there's a ceasefire, it's got to be seen as a win. Now, where does it lead? How long? Who knows? I want to deal with a more immediate question. Did our bombing work? Well, yes. If you now want to define the rationale for it as bringing a ceasefire, but that's not what we were told going into it, right? That takes us to the second tweet. Iran has officially responded to our obliteration of their nuclear facilities with a very weak response, which we expected and have very effectively countered. 14 missiles fired, 13 knocked down, 1 was let go because it wasn't going anywhere important. Obliterated is the word. Do we know that? No. Yes, the Iran attack was weak. We know that.
Wow, nice
the regime
shot.
has been crushed. Israel has been destroying its proxies and its capabilities with these most recent bombings, but they damaged the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah. So Iran is weak, and now a lot of their air systems were dismantled by Israel.
Right.
Now we get to our part. There's no confirmation that we obliterated their nuclear facilities. Reports say that senior U.S. officials believe we did not destroy the Fordow nuclear facility deep underground, and it may have been only severely damaged. How do they know
Right.
that? I don't know. And right now, we have no idea if we actually destroyed their 400 kilograms of enriched uranium. Iran says they moved it prior to this weekend's attacks. Do we know that? No. We don't know what happened to them, and we don't know if they moved them because they're liars.
Right.
So,
Right.
do we know why we bombed? Unless you're saying it's about the ceasefire. The ceasefire may now be looked at as the reason for the bombings. But there was a mixed message.
Well, I mean, obviously, we did cut down their capability to create more enriched weapons, atomic weapons, which need 90% and stuff. So stuff was near 60 or higher. And so, I mean, we had stuff taken out. Thing is, unless there's boots on the ground, we don't know exact significance, how much. We don't. Now, I do know Mossad, Israeli intelligence, they have people on the ground in Iran from different tribal sects and stuff like that. There are people that are friendly to the Israelis and stuff. They don't like the regime, so there are ways that they could probably get spies and find out where the U.S. does not. They can find out stuff that American intelligence can't. But, I mean, to that I disagree with him on a bit. But as for the stuff that's missing, it's like I could remote view some of the stuff, and I could see stuff happening days ago and stuff.
Sure, right? No, we're doing this to destroy the nukes. The regime cannot have nuclear weapons. I agree with that premise. I have been light on criticism of even the apparently gray area of legality of this unilateral decision by the President of the United States, because I don't have a better idea, and I haven't heard of any better idea to get rid of the prospect of the regime.
There is a breaking news from the New York Post saying that some Israeli intelligence warned Iranian generals of what was going to happen before the strikes. If that is so, there is some really ratty behavior going on. If that is true, that's very treasonous as well. And in some countries, of course, you can be executed for that. I wonder about that.
Having nukes. That is my criticism of the MAGA schism and the pod bros who are hyper-isolationist and saying that he should be impeached for doing this. If you accept that the regime can't have nukes, and if you think they can have nukes, then you should be dismissed right there, because you don't know what you're talking about. What's the better idea? If you're going to condemn his idea, what's the better idea? They don't have one. They just complain for profit. Now, the confusion about why we did this, was it to get rid of the nukes, or was it for regime change?
Yep.
I'm not adding the regime change part. The administration never said that. They said it's not about regime change.
Yeah.
But then it was Trump who added to the confusion. After his officials said, no regime change. That's not what we're doing. It's about the nukes. He put out a tweet. It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? Trump knows there is no will for boots on the ground, and the regime is a bunch of zealots who are all about perception. So he should have known this barb would be counted.
This is the thing, is that the regime hates Americans. It is an Islamic extremist regime that constantly brainwashes their own people. It tells them we are the great Satan in Israel. One of us is big Satan, one is the smaller Satan, right? And they brainwash their kids and telling them that we are evil, Americans are all evil, Europeans are evil, and that we should all be destroyed. They hate Christianity, Catholicism, and of course Judaism and stuff like that. They just want everybody that does not conform to their Sharia law and stuff like that totally killed off. They don't want to, negotiate. They don't like that. They just want to, that their extremist state is the thing. So,
And it was. The Ayatollah put out a tweet, or whoever tweets for him. Those who know the Iranian people and their history know that the Iranian nation is a nation that isn't a nation that surrenders. The problem with the Ayatollah's tweet is that he is not the nation's leader. He's just the regime's leader, which is a bunch of Islamist terrorists oppressing the actual people of Iran. So, what else do we know? Iran is weak. Their top military commanders have been killed. Their top nuclear scientists have been assassinated. Their nuclear sites have been damaged somewhat. Reports say at least half their missile launchers have been destroyed, and a lot of their military infrastructure is damaged. But are we in a better position than before Trump left the deal? Well, when Iran signed the nuclear deal in 2015 with 7 countries, including Iran, and I emphasize that because this idea that it was all America is BS. The idea that Obama gave them billions is BS. Part of the negotiated deal among the 7 countries was the return of money that had been held, that was Iran's, and had been held for many years. So the idea that he just gave them money is deceptive, and the truth is enough, all right? They had enriched 10,000 kilograms of uranium between 3 and 5%. That's what you use for fuel, okay? They also enriched 400 kilograms of uranium to 20%, which can be used for medical research purposes or for energy production. But it's also on the path to a bomb. And a lot of experts don't believe they were using it for medical research.
They used to
Before
trust
Trump
those
left
sources.
the Iran deal, the IAEA reported that Iran was complying with the deal. And guess what?
I don't just trust
So did the Trump administration.
sources.
Weeks before he exited. And they only had 140 kilograms of reactor-grade uranium. And they were not enriching uranium to 20% anymore. Now this year, after he left the deal, Iran had 7,000 kilograms of reactor-grade uranium, 275 kilograms of uranium enriched to 20%. But they also had over 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. And look, they can claim they use it for cancer treatment, but that is to cause a cancer to us. That's what they're doing.
Right.
Uranium enriched to 60% is one step away from being enriched to 90%. That's nuclear weapon grade, okay? So, they've done more since Trump left the deal. And by most accounts, Iran doesn't have that much right now, even though we just bombed them because it was so urgent, which we never had proven to us. But here's now the problem. Iran on its own can't get it done, but what if they get help? What if the bombing incentivizes Russia to help them? Russia, who was part of that original deal, okay?
Yep, they were.
Former Russian President Medvedev said the other countries were willing to directly supply Iran with nuclear warheads in retaliation. Trump, went at him in this cartoonish way with you're not using the N-word, meaning nuclear, are you? No, you...
Casually turn around and we're nuclear. Our hardware was great over the weekend, 20 years advance over the pack is our nuclear submarines.
Using the N-word. Look, I can't believe that Russia would want to do that. But if they do, what a problem that would be. And the fact that the bombing has precipitated this back and forth makes you wonder about what impact it will have over time. So, economically, they have not moved on the Hormuz Strait, okay? The markets were going to tumble when the Iranian parliament called for the closure. That's 20% of the world's petrol goes through there, okay?
We could blow their ships to
Oil
pieces
prices
within
would
minutes.
skyrocket. But they haven't done anything yet, all right?
They can't hold
Now,
that. They can't.
Iran reportedly warned Trump before the attacks that it could activate sleeper cells embedded within the United States to strike inside the home.
Right.
One, why didn't he tell us that on Saturday night? That is the most important information, okay?
This is what some of us already knew, though. I mean, I believe it was reported. I believe it was Saturday. What was this? Yeah, it was. It was reported. It was on some sites that sleeper cells could be activated. And this is another part of illegal immigration that we have to worry about, is we don't know everybody that's in our country. People have been vetted. And this is a big, big problem. Not only that, but you have Jordan and you have Iraq, parts of Syria, etc. You have Russians, that can start stuff with, along with the Iranians as well, giving aid to Iranian sleeper cells, etc. Chinese have been doing stuff, even more so than Russians have. So.
Why? Why wouldn't you tell us that? That Iran said they're going to wake sleeper cells. You need the American people to see something and say something. And we are seeing a disturbing rise in extremism in our country. Yes, Islamist fanaticism, yes, but non-Islamists who are just becoming sympathetic to the cause, like the kids on campus who are pro-Hamas. And now this wing of the Democratic Party that is comfortable with the rhetoric of globalizing the intifada. You thought socialism was your biggest concern. Globalize the intifada? Appropriating the oppression of some perceived victim class? That's the new state of play on the political left? Really? Really? That's why there's greater risk of a lone wolf attack not having anything to do with a sleeper cell.
Right.
Than there ever was before.
Lone
Why do you say
wolves,
that?
definitely have to worry about them.
Look at Boulder. Look at the Israeli embassy. Look at the IVF clinic. Look at the CEO of the healthcare company and his murder. Were any of them jihadists? No. They were disaffected American males who had a perverse reckoning that violence was okay in the pursuit of their skewed politics. Now, the media has been asking all the questions that I am right now. And yes, there's a lot of criticism of the president wrapped in there. But his third tweet is one that he should not have sent. Bashing a signature blessing of our democracy, which is the media, does not help make anything stronger. Okay? And it cannot be that the pod bros are the only people that you can trust. There is no accountability. They flip-flop all over the place because they're just selling hot takes. And that's fine. I'm okay with the democratization of media. I say the more ideas, the better. But the idea that that's who you're going to go to for information? Really? That's what the president wants you to do. Why? Because they're just parroting his message. Even when they go sideways on him, as some of the pod bros are right now, even calling for Trump's impeachment, they have nowhere to go. Eventually, they're going to have to come back to him. And if he slaps any one of them, their following will get cut in half. So Trump lashes out at the media for saying that the nuke sites were not totally destroyed. And only the fake news would
it says right here,
they were totally
for Gabe
destroyed.
Sanchez, that Iran Israel not agreed to a
Then he
ceasefire.
did something that I don't understand, and I'm not even sure, I don't even think it's the first time he's done it. He calls Anderson Cooper. I don't care what Anderson said about me or, how he feels about why I was fired at CNN. I like Anderson Cooper. I respect Anderson Cooper. And I'll tell you what, Anderson Cooper, as a gay man, gets my respect and protection. And calling him Allison Cooper?
I don't like him. He's
we,
based politically, so I
not
don't.
only is that it's President of the United States. President of the United States. Feminizing him because he's gay? Because you don't like what he reported? We've got to be better than that. I don't care how much you want to dismiss of the president. Okay?
I just wonder.
You know that's not right. You know you didn't vote for that. You didn't sign
I just
up
wonder
for it.
how real
So don't
this
say it's okay.
so-called
Don't ignore it.
ceasefire
Don't
is.
just play to advantage. Okay? Calling Anderson anything but Anderson is a cheap shot that gets us nothing. Going after the media for asking real questions that we don't have the answer to is the damn job. Do we know it was obliterated? Do we know it was effective? Do we know the state of any? Now, if you want to say, well, we can't know yet, that's okay. That's an acceptable answer. But don't say you completely obliterated something when you're not being
I just wonder how
told that
real
and you don't know.
this is.
Okay?
Yeah.
And if you want to change why you bomb, that's fine. That's politics. See if you can sell it to the American people. I know you can sell it to MAGA. But we got to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. I'm telling you, all of this hate, all this constant division, even when it's gratuitous, even when you don't need it, like with what the president just did there. He had a great day if this ceasefire happens. And he's got to take a shot at somebody with a homophobic slur? Thank you for watching. Subscribe.
Yeah, I get different reports here that Iran didn't agree to it, to the ceasefire. So, let's see the Taylor propaganda. So I wonder how real this is. Let's see here. I just wanted ceasefire as it negotiated trade. I tried to get absolutely yeah, a lot of ways I think this is a step backwards. I've seen this as a step backwards myself because this isn't going to. They're only going to do the same thing over and over again. This is the same thing that other extremists, run their countries, including now Hamas has run, Gaza and stuff like that, and Lebanon, with Hezbollah and stuff like that, where they run a major part of those areas, and they agreed to a ceasefire to get rearmed, to get the ammunition, all this stuff. Then they go back to fighting and stuff like that. Same old, same old. It's been happening for over 2,000 years with this stuff, so let me see. I want to see this here. It's on 7. Let me see. Let's see about Qatar.
In the Middle East. Hi, everyone. Mike Pace here. Thanks again for joining us. It is a new hour here on Live Now from Fox. Just past 4 p.m. Eastern. We are 1 p.m. out on the West Coast as we continue. Welcome Ed Hussein, a senior fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much for being here with us, Ed. And first off, if I could just get your reaction to what we saw earlier today in Qatar.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. I appreciate it. I think Qatar is an illustration of the fact that there is a large American base in Al Udeid, and the Iranians feel the need to strike back for face-saving reasons, that they want to be seen to be in a position of having responded to the American-led attack on their nuclear enrichment facilities. So this is two things. One, a face-saving measure for the Iranians, and two, an attempt to say to America and its allies, even in the Gulf region, that the Iranians will not sit back, the Iranian government will not sit back and watch this.
And when we think about the next moves here, I mean, is Iran then hoping, okay, we tried to make a statement here. We hope now that President Trump and the U.S. Do not respond back? Or, I mean, is this something, because it would seem if you didn't have President Trump there, maybe this would all end. But having President Trump now as the president once again...
It doesn't matter what president is there. It doesn't... Listen, even if we weren't there in the Middle East, we had radical extremists that didn't like us doing business there. They hate the United States and Europe and stuff like that, what we stood for as far as freedom and women having rights, and how that they hated other religions. And so even having money tied into those areas to do business, you know, you can get attacked doing that as well. So it doesn't matter about the U.S. being there so much. It's going to happen. They hate us regardless. You know, they go after us just like, you know, Afghanistan did, Libya. Iran's been, you know, making problems for Europe and stuff like that and everything. So there's a lot of stuff. It's going to happen regardless what president or if we're in the region or not. They're just a very vengeful type of regime. So
seems like it could ramp up even more. I mean, what's your feelings?
My honest assessment is that, and this is based on President Trump's previous comments, that when Qasem Soleimani was killed during President Trump's first era in office, the Iranians called the White House and said, we will conduct an operation near an American naval base. Please don't respond, and please ensure that no one is on the move. We just need to do something to show to our people that, look, we can attack an American base. And lo and behold, President Trump understood the messaging, the thinking, the instinct, the theater behind it, and nobody was killed. Similarly, here in Qatar, Al Udeid Air Base is almost a city in its own right. Nobody was killed. I suspect the Americans, especially the White House, were informed of this movement. And if there is no further escalation, this may well be the end of the matter for now.
That never happened. They wouldn't tell us that they're going to attack us, and we would just let it happen. That's complete bullshit. Why is he just like, he's dumbfounded, completely dumbed out by it. Anyways, I want to see this.
Bob, for the benefit of our viewers,
before we get into this, though, like I said, is that I believe that this is another one of Trump's things where he wants to make this stuff about himself. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I'm not on any political side. I hate politics and stuff. But it's just, if you want things to where you have to get rid of the regime, this extremist regime, they're just going to go back and restart everything up again. As with any of these other terrorist organizations, that's what they do all the time. So I have over 40 years experience, you know, getting reports on this stuff. So
that doesn't know who you are, tell us who you are. Give us your credentials.
Bob Lazar.
Well, I'm a physicist.
Yes.
And a scientist. I've worked at various government institutions, one of them being Los Alamos National Labs in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And also I'm more prominently known for working at Area S4, which is about 15 miles.
This is from Motorhead Garage. Shout out to them. This is from 1997. I want to see if you said anything different or not here, but as far as like underground stuff like that goes into a mountain, I believe. I've seen S4 photos and stuff like that, and I've seen some bases where it goes into a mountain and stuff like that. So
South of Area 51 in
it's
the
right
Nevada
by it.
Desert, which is a top secret government research facility.
Where did you go to school, Bob?
I went to school at MIT and Caltech, also a couple other junior colleges here and there in California.
And what was your field of study?
Field of study was physics and electronics technology.
And when you were working for these different installations before you went to S4, you didn't have any connection with flying saucers whatsoever, did you?
No, I didn't have any connection, and in fact, I didn't even believe in them. I thought it was just, the rantings and ramblings of crazy people, more or less.
When was the first time that you actually began to believe or got interested in the subject enough to want to go someplace and maybe work with them?
Well, I was never interested in the subject at all, primarily because I didn't believe in it. It's when I was offered a job. Working on advanced propulsion systems is how it was advertised to me. And it was only later that I found out the job I was employed to do was to back engineer extraterrestrial craft, or an extraterrestrial craft. And it really happened backwards from the normal chain of events.
How did you come to get the job at the S4 area?
Well, that's a good question. And I really don't know if I can answer it. I don't know what motivated them. There are certainly more intelligent, more educated people around. There is a wide variety of high-profile scientists and physicists that they could have pulled out of the works anywhere. If anything, your guess is as good as mine on that. I really don't know why I was chosen. I did have not really connections per se, but I did know a couple people that were also involved in the project. I really didn't know they were at the time, but they could have put a name in, and could have wound up that way.
You think that Dr. Teller might have had anything to do with it?
It's a substantial possibility. At one time, while I was working at Los Alamos, I went to see one of his lectures. I got there early, and he was outside, and coincidentally, at that particular time, I was on the front page of the newspaper he was reading, and he was reading about an article about a small Honda Civic that I had converted to run on jet power. And I introduced myself and explained what I was doing, and some years later, I had sent a resume to him and some other national labs when I decided to get back into the scientific field after I had moved to Las Vegas, and it is substantially possible that he had a hand in doing it. He did refer me to someone at EG&G, which in turn did lead to the employment at S4.
When did you actually see the first vehicle or ship or craft that you knew for sure wasn't of this manufacturer on this planet?
Well, I did see it probably the second or third time I went out to the facility. And at that time, I wasn't convinced that's what the craft was. When I first saw it, I thought that this was a U.S.-made, very advanced next-generation fighter, and in fact that this would explain all the UFO sightings. It was only later to find out that that wasn't the case when I started receiving some documentation on the craft and actually got to go in it and found out what the scope of the project was. But I had seen it earlier on, but really didn't know what I was looking at.
And what was the scope of the project? What were you supposed to do to this craft?
Well, the scope of the group there, the people at S4, were to back engineer, essentially take apart and discover the manufacturing process and materials used to produce this craft, this flying saucer. More specifically, my group consisted of me and another person, his name was Barry, that we dealt with the power and propulsion system of the craft, and we were to back engineer that. We were to see if the power and propulsion system could be duplicated, and if it could possibly be duplicated with earthly materials instead of any exotic foreign materials that we might have come across.
When you saw that craft and you realized it was an alien craft, did that upset you in any way, that knowing that here was a vehicle from another system sitting right here on the planet Earth, and of course always believing that there was no such thing. It was hallucinations and so forth. What was your feeling inside when you were confronted with the reality that all that you had believed before was gone now, and you had to take a whole new look at things?
Well, actually, that's a good question. A lot of people have said, boy, that must have been exciting, and that really wasn't the case. The feeling really came over me when I was permitted in the craft to see the placement of the subsystems that we were going to be working on. And it was not a feeling of excitement at all. It was a very ominous feeling, a feeling, like I've said before, that you shouldn't be there. It's very hard to relay, but it was a real overwhelming, odd feeling that I had. Without trying to use a pun, it was a very unearthly atmosphere, and as it should be, because none of the materials were familiar, none of the architecture of the device was familiar, and it was very odd.
Yeah, because obviously they were here and we weren't there, so being a scientist, you would know the ramifications of such a situation. Which brings me to this question: how far in the future do you estimate that craft was to what we're doing at the present time?
Well, I've heard other people estimate things like that, saying, well, it's 1,000 or 10,000 years in advanced of our technology, and I don't really find that to be the case. All I really find to be the case is probably a technology that's about 100 or 200 years in advance of us, and the only reason being is because they stumbled upon a device, a machine that can actually make gravity, that can produce gravitational waves. Now, this is something that our science and physics knows. We know what gravity is, we know how it works, but we really just observe it. We don't understand it, and we certainly don't have a machine that can create a gravitational wave. And because they've developed this, they have a unique propulsion system, and that has a lot of offshoot possibilities and other uses. Also, the power source is fairly unique. We know of its existence. There is a total annihilation reaction we know of. The 3 atomic reactions we know of are fission, as you see in an atomic bomb, fusion, as you see in a hydrogen bomb, and we're currently trying to make a fusion reactor to provide power cleanly. And we also know there's a total annihilation reaction, which is a extremely, virtually 100% efficient reaction that we're really haven't even begun to do any research with. But here are these systems in place operating, and it really didn't look that far in advance of what we were.
Well, one interesting thing, that reactor that powered this vehicle was very small in relationship to the power it produced, was it not?
Oh, it was tremendously tiny. You're looking at something that puts out more power than an average nuclear power plant, and if anyone lives near one of those, you know how big those things are. And we're looking at something, scarcely bigger than a basketball that's doing this.
Incredible. Do you think that these beings pose any threat to the human race?
I don't think so, and again, that's speculation. I really wouldn't know anything about that, but if the intent was to do harm, from all indications, it seems like, the Earth has been visited for thousands of years, and if there was any intent to do harm, it would have already been done. If anything, now this is just my personal speculation, I think we're more of a Disneyland, an interesting thing to observe, but I don't believe there's any real direct interaction. There may be, but I don't see any evidence of it.
We're a circus.
Why doesn't the government just come clean on all of this? Because there's so much speculation on it. There's so much disinformation out there. Why don't they just come forward and say, this is what's going on. They don't pose any threat, and it's just something you're just going to have to live up to, people.
Well, it's difficult to do that. First of all, if they were going to come completely clean, they're going to have to admit that as far back as 50 years ago, they knew this was going on. And in the meantime, they've been spreading disinformation and lies about events that, that have occurred. So they're not going to go and say, we've been lying to you for 50 years. So to start with, there's a problem there. Even if they started today and said, well, we found out a couple things, and here's what we found out. Because these systems are advanced and they pose a real unique function, they present a substantial weapon potential. And because of that, all the information is certainly not going to be released. However, I've always wondered why at least the existence of the craft, at least a statement to the effect of, we have found some material, we have some information, a lot of it pertains to national security. However, we can verify the existence life elsewhere.
This is the
other
thing. Well, some of these UFOs, I know that some of these flyers that we have flying these machines, that we have like psychic telepathic abilities. There's people that can use these machines, vehicles, spirit, device, stuff like that. And I just wonder how his mind wasn't unlocked to be able to do that, or if some reason it's shut down or something. I don't know. He was in a different. He was supposed to re-engineer it, though. He wasn't there to fly it, so that's one reason, of course. But he did get some psychic phenomena from that craft that he did not. When you're inside these craft, you know it's not earthly whatsoever. Not only that, but sometimes these craft are how it warps space-time around you, and how they appear bigger on the inside than they actually are. They can have other rooms, etc. So,
and Earth and technology that we have, and perhaps release a little bit of information here, but they're not even doing that. And on that note, there might be several reasons that we haven't thought of. A lot. Who knows what beliefs that it might interfere with? It's a scary thought. We've pretty much put ourselves in the center of the entire.
I do remember he was given a specific model, a specific craft, like sport model. There's different models that we have, stuff like that. He's given a specific kind that's, not, like some of the others that we have.
Our universe, that we're the, most superior race, and, it might upset people to find out that we're really not that significant.
Well, with that thought in mind, do you think perhaps maybe that the aliens themselves may be saying, look, it's better if you just kind of keep it quiet and let us just go on about observing your little Disneyland, and you think that might be part of it too?
It could certainly be part of it. It could be the architecture of the whole plan might have been laid down by them. Who knows what kind of communication, if any, that we've had. But, again, your guess is as good as mine on that.
How many different types of the craft did you see? Just one, or were there other styles?
Well, there was one craft that I worked on. That craft was a very sleek, thin-looking craft compared to the other ones that were there. There were nine craft. I nicknamed this one the sport model because it was a very sleek-looking 50s style flying saucer looking thing, and the name pretty much stuck and people were using that name. I really don't know much about the other crafts other than the fact that whether it was accidentally or just a coincidence that I happened to see them one time. All the hangar doors were open at one particular time when I was there, and normally they were closed, but for the most part the only information I have is on the craft that I particularly worked on.
So you don't have any idea whether the other craft came from different systems or they were all from the same system? You have no idea about that?
Well, I do know for a fact that the power and propulsion system in all the crafts were the same. Oh. So that either says, now you have to start speculating that, number one, they either all come from the same manufacturer, right, or number two, someone is subbing out parts. And right, your mind can run away on this somewhere, because you see obviously a vehicle like this is produced. Well, there must be a factory somewhere, right, and eventually your mind just runs off with you, right, and you have to draw a line somewhere.
Of course, it may be the day that we will buy the reactor and the system and the components from this big galactic company that has the exclusive on it. Maybe there's some sort of a patent on this thing. Right?
It's possible, but to me, it's so hard to believe, and I know that's strange coming from me, but I kind of draw a line between the actual alien existence and a social structure, and I think that's to keep my sanity, and I pretty much only deal with the stuff that I know for fact and had hands-on experience with, because your mind can really run away with you, and who knows what's going on. You'll find yourself standing outside staring at the sky wondering why no one's going to talk to you. And so to keep my sanity, I just deal with what I actually know to be fact, and try not to speculate too much.
Getting back to that, did you actually see the craft that you worked on fly or operate?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
did.
you
On,
did.
on one occasion close up and on several occasions from about 10 miles away. On the one particular occasion, there was a test flight going on. They came and got me to witness a short duration flight, and I stood at the door of the hangar, and the craft lifted off the ground, which was an amazing sight in itself, something about 52 feet in diameter, virtually silently lift off the ground and just move around a bit and set back down. But that was the close range operation I got to saw.
Can humans duplicate that vehicle?
At the time I was there, that was not even in the realm of possibility.
How about, are they able to fly them?
Well,
Would they be able to fly 'em?
Well, there was a test pilot flying the craft, so apparently we had developed the expertise, at least to lift the thing off the ground and move it around. As far as taking it any great distance or taking it out of the atmosphere, it's something I don't think would happen. This is, a prized possession, an operating extraterrestrial craft, and things change when you leave the atmosphere. Things like the fact there's no air outside, the fact that there's not exactly 100% chance you can bring it back now. So, I don't think they're flying around to Jupiter and taking looks at planets. I think they're very careful with it. They're just testing it, and and will remain that way for an extremely long time.
It would seem like the government would really be just, all the stops would be pulled out to try to duplicate this, because this seems to me like the ultimate vehicle to move around, especially in our own solar system.
Boy, I remember those computers.
Well, yeah, you hit on 2 points there. It is the ultimate vehicle to move around, and imagine being able to go anywhere instantaneously. Now, without any weapon potential at all, consider that being a weapon potential. We have trouble in the Middle East. You know how long it takes us to get aircraft carriers out there? Well, we'll be out there in a couple of weeks. I mean, it takes lots of planes refueling. If we could be out there in the snap of a finger and load something up like this with tanks and weapons, that's or behind enemy lines instead of advancing in front of them. I mean, this is a tremendous weapon. And it's because of that, I think, where we see a lot of the secrecy stemming from. So it's kind of...
My father told me, it's like, we could be anywhere around the world in a couple of hours or less. I mean, my father knew of some stuff that we had where it would take no time to be anywhere around the world. This was, let's see, the early 2000s. I remember my father telling me this.
Torn between pulling out all the stops to move ahead on development and putting all the stops in to stop anyone from finding out what's going on. So they're really between a rock and a hard place.
That's exactly how fast it is.
Well, it can...
Don needs to ask then just exactly how fast is the craft?
Is that close enough?
Do you know how fast this craft might fly?
Well, it's because of the way that the craft operates. It's kind of a... The question really doesn't make sense because it's a gravitational propelled device.
Yeah, there
and we
is
know
a
gravity
speed.
bends time
Yeah.
and bends space, distorts time and
Right.
distorts space. When you move in a linear mode,
Like a
you
slipstream.
travel X distance in so much time, which is what determines your velocity.
Right.
However, if you're distorting time and distorting the distance, the equation no longer makes sense. It's nonsense. So essentially, because of the gravitational propulsion of the device, you can move at tremendous distances almost instantaneously.
Right.
Did you ever figure out, or did they tell you where this craft came from what system or whereabouts?
Well, there was documentation that they had, but it was something that I couldn't verify. I knew what I was working on because I got to analyze it and develop theories about it. But as far as information from other people, I don't know if the information's correct, but I assume most of it was.
So,
If in
yeah.
fact it was, they claim that the craft came from the Zeta Reticuli star system. It's a star system called the Net, I believe, that's visible only in the southern hemisphere, so don't bother looking at it if you're in the United States. But it's about 32 light years away, which is a tremendous distance considering that even if you were moving at the speed of light, it would take you
And
32
I've often heard that we have space forces, above Antarctica in space and stuff like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the reason why we have classified space forces there, is because the Southern Reticular system is a part, of the Southern Hemisphere, etc. It makes sense.
2 years to get there and 2 years to get back, which of course a speed we can't even attain now.
Of course, this craft obviously gets back and forth faster than that.
Well, it must, and because of the assumption that number one, it's small. Number two, there's no stores for anything such as food. It doesn't appear to be any waste area. It doesn't appear to hold any cargo. So wherever it came from there really fast. That's why another reason I called it the sport model. It has no luggage space.
Kind of like a dragster.
Exactly.
Trunk, it's got no bathroom.
Right.
Got
It's got
bathroom.
one specific function to
Yeah.
get from one place to the other as fast as possible, and that's what this looked like it did.
Sounds good.
This is where some people think, that these are are just vessels without souls and stuff like that with some of these as well. Or some of them have, they just don't need to eat, they have a different type of energy drive than we do. From what I've heard, it's all the above. It depends on the species and stuff like that. You do have like artificial intelligence, you have living beings as well, etc. There are many different beings out there. So, not to have a bathroom, that sounds crazy, but, some are what you call asexual, which means they don't have those parts or whatever for whatever reason, so.
When were you taking off this project, or did you just quit the project, or did the project get completed?
Now we're into a long story. I never specifically quit. A problem formed, and I don't know if you want to go into a long dissertation here, but it was. I really don't know how to explain it.
He is so lucky he was never killed.
Problem
Real lucky.
formed. You took some people out to
Others
see
were.
the craft flying.
Well, I had taken some people out there, but that wasn't where the problem had stemmed from. The problem was before that. Because of all the time, I was keeping this quiet from my family and friends, everything. A lot of times I had to leave during the night. At the time, my wife obviously thought that I was running around with someone. Now, I had given permission during a lot of the security clearances to monitor my telephone, my mail, everything. I gave written permission for that. And
this is something my father and other people I know that have worked at these installations, is that they do spy in on your home phone, your phones that you use there on the base as well. The FBI is always looking in. They also know if you're not getting along with your spouse, because if you're having any mental issues, that could be a reason for you also divulging secret, special access information. And they usually get rid of those people fast. Anybody that has any personal issues, they don't want to have to worry about them. I don't know how it is now. Back then, that's the way that it was. You're just always spied on. Some guys that worked at these facilities, from what I heard also, that they go psychological, therapist type of appointments every week to see if they're mentally fit, and if they're unfit, they're let go as well. So you're really vetted back when, at least. So
as months went by, my wife started having an affair. Now, they were monitoring this and knew about it, but I didn't. And because they saw potential for an emotional instability, they didn't want anyone, they wanted the situation to resolve itself. So they stopped me from coming out to work. Some time went by, and then I began to get a little concerned that now I have all this information. They don't want me coming out there anymore. And this is when I started to bring a couple friends out to show them what was going on in case something actually happened.
That's right.
And then we got caught going out there. So it was just a terrible chain of events that occurred, and eventually I just wound up not going there.
7022 227.
Hello? I'm in the middle of an interview. Bye.
Handle that well.
Yeah.
Find out the size of the craft.
The
Those
craft
phones are
is
a lot more
about
secure than
52
cell
feet in
phones.
diameter and about 16 feet high. Originally, some years ago when I came out, I had the dimensions wrong. I thought it was about 30 feet in diameter, and because I'm really not good at judging distances closely. However, I worked with some of the model people from the Tester Corporation, and they had some artists come out, and what we did is we took dimensions of things that I knew that were close up, and they scaled them back and essentially reconstructed the entire craft that way, and the dimensions and everything matched. So I think the final ones came out to about 52.8 feet in diameter and 16 or 15.2 feet high, something along those lines.
Tell us a little bit about the craft itself inside, where you went inside the craft, what you saw, and how, just kind of a basic function.
Well, there's 3 levels to the craft. There's the central level that
Lower
the hatch
the upper.
lets you into.
Yeah.
This is where there are 3 seats. In the exact center of the craft, there's the reactor that powers it. Surrounding the reactor are 3 gravity amplifiers that provides the power and the field that propel the craft. On the level underneath that are the actual waveguide antennas, horns, whatever you want to call them, that actually emit the gravity wave. They hang down in a triad at the bottom level of the craft, and they are movable. The very top part of the craft, there are small black portholes, we've called them on there. Now, I don't know exactly what's on that level, but I firmly believe that that's the navigational system, and those porthole type devices are actually sensors that determine the craft's orientation in space, so it can tell whether it's from star fixes or landmarks or who knows what, or a system that we're not familiar with, but that's how the craft determines its orientation and position in space.
How about the construction of the different components? What was it like? Was it bolted together, snapped together, held together with Velcro? What held this thing together?
Well, it was fascinating that there were no seams, no visible seams that I was able to see. There were no fastening devices, rivet screws. Everything had the appearance of being injection molded. All different systems that were connected to each other were completely smooth and connected, like you'd see in a giant, plastic injection molder. There was really nothing that was discernible as a fastening device or a seam to me anywhere.
Which sounds like some technology I'd love to see in Top Fuel. There would be some really fine things, dragsters we could build with some of that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's for sure.
Bob, judging from the size of the craft, the height of each level, the size of the seats, then what would be your guesstimate as to the size of the being?
Judging from the seat and judging from the height of the ceiling, the being's height probably couldn't have exceeded 4 feet. That's tops, because when you walk into the craft, you're hunched all the way over. In fact, you have to practically crawl in, but you're hunched all the way over until you come up to the center of the craft. So it's certainly nothing our size. More probably half our size. 3.5 feet would be more realistic.
The seats are smaller.
Oh yeah.
Well, you've heard, here's another area that's always been strange. You've heard all about these abductions. Everybody's talking about they've been abducted. What is your opinion on the abduction stories?
Personally, I don't believe them, but and again, that's something strange coming from me, coming out with a flying saucer story, but I don't see enough evidence, and it's just a gut feeling. I could be completely wrong, but I just have a hard time with most of them. And if in fact, they did occur, there might be one or two
They do occur.
that may have actually occurred, with reference to Betty and Barney Hill, who were a couple in the 60s who claimed the first abduction. There is some interesting, evidence there, but I don't know for sure, and my gut feeling is that I just don't buy it.
That wasn't his job either to do an investigation stuff. Yeah,
And
I know
as you
that
said
stuff
earlier,
is real.
they may be
but-
just looking at us like we're some big Disney World, or something interesting to
Right.
to observe. And you said How long do you think they've been watching it? I hear you say earlier you think over 1,000 years or more than that.
Oh, more than that. I mean, there's very interesting old paintings from the Renaissance period that have pictures of flying saucers drawn in the background.
Yeah,
of the
they
sky.
do. A lot of people don't know
obviously
that.
Not a smudge, but obviously an elliptical shaped
Tribal
craft
land
and,
has
a glow
markings
around
of
it. I mean, so some of
ETs.
these are fascinating. So whether or not that proves anything, I mean, there's certainly mention of them in some older
Yeah,
texts
why would
too.
they draw
So
it if it wasn't there?
from the evidence that I've seen, it appears that they've been coming here for thousands of years.
You've never actually seen one of these beings.
No, I haven't.
Do you know at these have you ever heard of any underground facilities where they might be have some of these beings?
Well, I've heard a lot of stories, and in fact, S4 is built into a mountain. The only thing, and the reason for that is to disguise it from satellite photographs. It doesn't go down unless there are parts of the facility that I wasn't permitted to go into. But I haven't seen any of these deep underground facilities where there's aliens working side by side with humans working on secret projects. I don't know if I believe those, and in fact, just because I have a negative opinion about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But I just have a hard time believing that.
Have you heard of any of these ships being in any other countries? Are we the only one? Is the United States the only one that has any of these craft?
Well, I've heard stories. I don't really keep abreast of all the UFO information, but the one that caught my attention was there were sightings in Sweden, I believe in the 70s and early 80s, of a farmer out there called Billy Meyer. And the reason that caught my attention is the craft looks exactly like the one that I was working on. He has some fantastic photographs of it. Now, people claim that the photographs are phony and so on and so forth. However,
Yeah, there was a teacher, university, I think it was a university professor, though. I don't know if it's the same guy. I think it's someone different. Someone different. And he'd bring his students with them, and it's either Norway or Sweden. In this one valley and stuff, and there'd be mountains on both sides, and he'd go into this valley in between. And they set up chairs, camera equipment, and stuff like that. And they'd capture UFOs, some going up to 40,000, was projected at 40,000 plus miles per hour. Some slower than that, some faster, etc. So, I mean, stuff that happened there is very interesting to look at.
they look fairly decent, and on top of that, it looks exactly like the craft that I worked on. So if it was a phony picture, the chances of them building a model that looked exactly like the actual craft are remote. So it is possible that craft was there, or we may have been testing it ourselves and taken it that far, though I doubt that. But that has caught my attention.
Has the government given you any problem about coming out and discussing this?
Initially, there was a big problem with that, and there were threats and so on and so forth. But over time, once it started airing on TV, in fact, for the first day, they broke into the news here in Las Vegas and aired it. It was pretty much a hands-off approach after that.
Bob, obviously this was all top secret information when you were working on this project, and then the news started to break the information to the general public. Did you have any problem with the government when this happened?
Well, initially, before it hit the news, there was a big problem. There were lots of threats and things of that sort. They even hassled a lot of my friends. I had a friend working at another facility on the test site, working with stealth fighters, and they pulled him out of work and interrogated him. And they pretty much covered all bases. But after it went on the news, they broke into the news one night in Las Vegas that it was a hands-off approach after that, because really doing anything would really verify what I said was true. And it's pretty much been that way.
They also tried to delete a lot of his stuff.
Have they done anything like insert disinformation in to discredit you in any way?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
when people say, well, this is just Bob Lazar, he's the kook out
We
there in
did.
Las Vegas.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the disinformation is is so fantastic, it's absolutely entertaining to the point now. I mean, I've heard stories that I was a murderer, that I was selling women in South America. I mean, any bizarre story you can think of has been attributed to me. Anything to discredit what I've said. And some of them are tremendously funny, and some of them have some basis in fact, and they've just distorted it and changed it around. And, you know, it's really unbelievable. And for the most place, you get most of the stuff's on the internet because there's no ramifications of anybody ever saying on anything on the internet. I can, you know, put up a web page that says Don Garlitz is a child molester, and you can't do a thing about it. So it's you know, it's open season.
That is true. That is true.
You know, drag racing is real expensive, especially top fuel racing. You know, it's up to $10,000 a run now, whether you do that or not.
No, I didn't.
But what kind of budget do you think the military would have on a project like this?
Black budgets.
Well, the budget would probably be phenomenal, and you know, where the money comes from is another good question. It was probably originally funneled through some of the Star Wars budget, but obviously it's labeled as a black project, which means it doesn't have any real accounting to it. It just absorbs money from other places, you know, without any paper trail. But I imagine the budget is fairly substantial.
Now, where did they find the craft?
Do you know
That's
where
the
this
defense
craft came from? Did they
contractors
ever
for
reveal to you
other
where
contractors.
they found the craft?
No, I don't know if it was found, given, or dug up in a hole somewhere. The only information that I had was just the little blurb that they gave us that the craft had originated in the Zeta 2 Reticuli star system, and you know, that's all I know.
But it wasn't damaged in a way, so it obviously wasn't crashed.
No, I don't believe that it crashed. It was in perfect operating condition.
Did the people who you worked for feel like that we had the capabilities of catching up with this technology?
Oh, absolutely. And that was part of the intent, was to
reverse engineer,
move our technology up to the stage and duplicate it. And that's what the big push was not just to duplicate it, but to duplicate it with materials that we had and were familiar with. And you know, I only knew what happened up to 1989. You know, it's coming up on 10 years now. Now, wherever the project is operating, we know it's not up near Area 51 anymore, but they may have already come pretty far.
We know they didn't stop on the work, don't we?
You got that right.
What about the Roswell incident? Are you familiar with that?
I've heard a lot about that, like everyone has. Watched some specials on television here and there. I don't have any inside information on it, but you know, it certainly seems like something occurred there.
Well, over 300 people have come forward that claim they saw the crash, or saw the crash site, or saw a being.
I have all these tabs.
In our today's court of law.
I have all these tabs. I have some stuff on Roswell and stuff like that of what happened and stuff, but on their time.
People say they saw you kill somebody, you could go to the gas chamber.
Oh, right. I believe in court, it's an absolute win. I defy anyone to disprove it in court. But, you know, we don't have that opportunity.
Let's ask you about, can you describe exactly how this anti-gravity, this gravity machine, this you call it the size of a basketball, functions or works? Let's get into the engineering.
Bob, for the sake of our viewers out there that are technologically inclined, can you give us a kind of a brief overview of how that little small basketball reactor, how it could generate power and cause a gravitational field to form?
I'll give a brief overview of it. It can get fairly technical, but basically what it is a reactor and an accelerator. The base plate of the device is something similar to a cyclotron, where particles are sped up in a magnetic field and accelerated to a high speed. The fuel is an element that we don't have here on Earth, known as element 115. It's something we also can't synthesize in an accelerator. There are heavier elements that we do synthesize, like plutonium and things along those lines, and generally they have a half-life, which means they disintegrate very rapidly, and the higher you go up on the periodic chart, the faster these things disintegrate. However, we have always theorized that there's a little island somewhere around element 114, 115, that elements will become once again stable, like other elements are, like zinc and iron and things that we're more familiar with. Well, apparently this is the case. Whether this element occurs naturally somewhere else in the solar system, somewhere else in the galaxy, or it's synthesized is, again, speculation. However, this is the fuel that's used. When this is bombarded with an accelerated proton from, the pseudo-cyclotron on the bottom of the device, it transmutes itself. It produces element 116, which releases a form of radiation that we really haven't seen, an antimatter radiation. And though antimatter sounds like something out of Star Trek, it's something that we do produce in small quantities in accelerators. It's a particle with a charge and a spin that's opposite of normal matter. The reason antimatter is so interesting to us and has been so interesting in science fiction is that when antimatter reacts with matter, when antimatter contacts matter, it releases 100%. It's almost a total conversion of that matter to energy with virtually nothing left. Now, in all other fusion and fission reactions, you typically see an efficiency of about anywhere from 0.8% to about 8%. And you know how much energy those reactions release. This is a 100% efficient reaction. So what happens is this particle is accelerated, it interacts with the element, it produces this antimatter radiation. It's just really anti-hydrogen is what it's producing. And this is reacted with a gaseous matter target. When they react, they produce a small explosion, a tremendous amount of heat. And how that heat is converted into electricity is a thermionic generator, which is something along the lines of a thermocouple. It's something that when it gets hot, as long as you put heat energy into it, it produces electrical energy out. However, the devices, we power spacecraft with them. We use, in fact, that probe that just went to Saturn, the Cassini probe, had 70 some odd pounds of plutonium in it, and it used a thermionic generator, but ours aren't quite that efficient. This is, again, virtually 100% efficient, that the reactor itself doesn't even get hot when it's operating. That's just how the reactor produces a large amount of electrical energy. It also produces, because of the element 115, which happens to have a unique property, that this gravitational field extends beyond the perimeter of the atom. And again, we can get into a lot of particle physics in that there are some forces that are mislabeled. But this field that the element produces is amplified, very similar to a microwave. In fact, microwaves are transmitted through waveguides, which are like pipes, and that's very similar to how this is amplified and also transmitted essentially through pipes, through waveguides throughout the craft, and focused, amplified, and used for propulsion.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah, it gets pretty hairy, but it is a fascinating technology.
This has got to be, Bob, the biggest story in the history of mankind. Why has the mainstream press stayed off of it completely? And you know how they love big stories.
Well, they do, but it's a dangerous story. It's like reporting on Bigfoot, because there's not a lot of evidence. Once you leave a project like that, you don't leave with drawings and descriptions. For the most part, they virtually erase your background, and I know that sounds like Mission Impossible, but even the places that I worked, the places that I was educated, deny that I was ever there. I mean, it's a far-reaching thing, and without proof, nobody wants to look like they have egg on their face, so you don't get mainstream anything to cover this. Until there's more evidence, there's more proof. And
anyways, I think I've got through. I hear there's strikes again from Iran on Israel, so so much for that. Let me see here. UFOs. This is from News Nation. Chris Bledsoe on President's interest in UFOs. Summoning orbs, stuff like that.
G'day and welcome back to Reality Check. I'm your host, Ross Coulter. And of course, we're still in
Ross
Indian
Bolton.
Wells, Palm Springs, California, not sunning it up on the beach or by the pool. What we're actually doing is doing interviews with people attending the Contact in the Desert UFO conference. And I'm delighted to say today we've got an interview I've been looking forward to for years. Chris Bledsoe. He's a man from North Carolina, a former construction contractor and a deeply religious family man whose life took a dramatic turn following a profound experience in 2007. Born and raised in the American South, Chris built a successful career in the construction industry and raised 4 children with his wife Yvonne, grounded in a strong Christian faith. By 2007, however, he faced severe challenges. The financial crisis had decimated his business, and he battled debilitating Crohn's disease, pushing him to the brink of despair. On January the 8th, 2007, while fishing along the Cape Fear River with his sons and 3 colleagues, Chris was overwhelmed and stepped away to pray. He claims a UFO appeared, accompanied by orbs of light, and he experienced 4 hours of missing time. During this encounter, he says he was miraculously healed of Crohn's disease and began experiencing ongoing interactions with what he describes as angelic entities, including a figure he calls the Lady, a divine feminine presence linked to figures like the Egyptian goddess Hathor or the Virgin Mary. These beings, Chris asserts, communicate messages of love, spiritual awakening and environmental urgency.
This is how a lot of we have near-death experiences, stuff like that, how all religions are wrong, but all of them are right to a certain extent. There is no exactly one God. How people become very dumb and stupid to how religions are. You see how religions have changed over 10,000 years or since this began, way back even further. Tribal stories, stuff like that. And how the way it is today, I'd say it's mainly just alive because of the stupid internet. But I mean, how a lot of religions are right about half the stuff, and some stuff they're totally off. Like how there's only heaven and hell, that's false. There's different dimensions, stuff like that. There's different deities as well, and everything. So it's a lot different than people think. So.
His experiences have drawn attention from researchers, government agencies, media. His 2023 book, UFO of God, details his journey, including interactions with NASA, yes, the CIA, and religious leaders. He's appeared on shows like Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, and he claims to be able to summon orbs, which has been photographed and filmed extensively. Skeptics, of course, question the veracity of his claims, while supporters, including former intelligence officials, vouch for their veracity. Chris continues to share his story through his son Ryan's podcast, Bledsoe Said So, great name for a podcast. He also does public talks, emphasising a consciousness-driven connection to the phenomena. He lives in Hope Mills, North Carolina, and he's dedicated his life to spreading a message of hope and transformation. Chris, welcome to Reality Check. Great to see you here.
Thank you for having me, Ray.
I've been looking forward to talking to you for years because I read about you in American Cosmic in Diana Walsh-Pasulka's book. And I was intrigued because the thing that constantly attaches itself to you is this idea that there are people from the CIA, Tim Taylor from NASA, who've taken an extremely close interest in what you have seen and done.
Right, exactly. And a whole lot more. There's quite a few more agencies that's involved in that.
Are there ongoing investigations by government agencies at the moment into what you're doing?
Just last week, I had 8 scientists at my house.
Wow, from which agency?
The National Science Foundation, NASA, the FDA,
Wow.
and
Food
some
Drug
other
Administration.
agencies.
What the fuck? are
Other
they doing?
government agencies by any chance?
Yeah.
So what are they doing?
They wanted to see it. They're humans just like us. If you didn't know they had government on their tag, they're just people. And they all wanted to see it. So they called me during Easter and said, can we come?
Was it a formal, official government thing, or was it an informal visit by people who just happened to work for the government?
That's more like what it was, government people that called me to say, can we come and experience the phenomenon? So I invited, 10 of them came, and if I said their names, you would know some of them. They're in the halls of Congress, and so one of them is on the board with the UAP disclosure thing, and they had some experiences with me.
So they saw phenomena?
50 or 60 orbs.
When you meet these people from the CIA, I'm Jim Semivan, I know Jim. Tim Taylor, I wish I could talk to Tim Taylor, he's an enigma.
Yeah.
Do they convey to you an impression that the government knows a lot more than they're letting on?
Yes.
What do you reckon is the
Of course
reason
they do.
why? This is the thing that vexes me the most. Why the secrecy? I mean, it's
Well,
pretty blooming obvious. You're having an experience with something that is real.
Right.
Why do they continue to deny any knowledge of engagement with anomalous phenomena?
I'm pretty sure it's based on national security and technology, and it's the Department of Defense that enforces that. You know, they have more information the United States does about the UFO than any other country, and they.
I mean, that's a load of bullshit. It's not. I mean, so many people like to say it's about national security. It's not. It's about a bunch of psychopaths and criminals that's running these programs. They want to weaponize everything. They want to keep it for themselves. They do not want this. They want this away from the public. They see the public having this as a threat, and being able to remote view psychic abilities that goes beyond their technology. They want to be able to surveil us. They want to be able to look through whatever we're doing on the computer, the cell phones. They want to control us and everything. And I'm sick of that bullshit out there saying it's national security. There are people on the inside, playing people on the inside. You know, I know a lot of stuff myself. This has nothing to do with national security. That is total BS.
They covet it.
Let's talk about that moment on the Cape Fear River in 2007.
Okay.
What happened?
It's a long story, but it was a nut in a shell. I was at the bottom, rock bottom. I lost everything. I was living in $1 million home, building 100 homes a year. My kids living on a golf course with a pool. Now, because of the World Trade Center thing, I lost everything, down to where I lost my home. And 4 kids, little ones, I moved them to a mobile home that had no floor, no finished floor, just plywood, and no kitchen cabinets because we couldn't afford them. That's how, and I couldn't afford lunch for school. I had to get free lunches. And so I was having thoughts. I didn't want to live anymore, and I didn't like that. So I was crying out to heaven, and UFOs came. That's why the book's named UFO of God.
So do you think, I mean, it's interesting, I've got many religious friends, and I was having a conversation with one of them the other day, and she teases me that I talk about UFOs and think that they're possibly extraterrestrial or aliens or something like that. She thinks they're angels. And when I asked her what these angels look
this
like,
is the thing, is that they're good and bad. They're not all angels. There are evil ones as well. And me, I don't like the stupid God type thing, because honestly, if I was God, I would not allow this BS that's happening across the planet. I wouldn't allow suffering. I wouldn't allow this violence. I would not allow famine. I wouldn't allow all this. I have no respect for this religious stuff. So I don't. But it's just, listen. I've seen angels and stuff like that. I see demons, all this other stuff like that. But it really angers me a lot when people say that, these are stuff of angels. It's not always like that. There's good and evil ETs, different civilizations and stuff like that. It's just who people see, that's how they interpret things. But like I said, there's good and bad out there.
She said they're orbs.
Well, yeah, and
right.
I think that's probably what they are, although I don't know. In a court of law, I couldn't tell you that I'm for sure of anything, but I can tell you that they come with prayer. When I say a prayer, that's when they come. Don't do any rituals or any whatever you may do, or just say a simple prayer.
Was that the first time you'd ever seen any kind of anomalous phenomena?
No. In 2005, when we lost our home, the very site that we moved the mobile home to was next door to my dad. So we were at Thanksgiving of 2005. We were at his house having dinner. Somebody walked outside and come running in and said, "Look." And we all went out, Mom, Dad, the whole family. And there was a huge lime green, looked like a cigar, hovering right over where my house was to be built. It sat there silent and moved away. But then I had a near-death experience, and I got very sick from that point, and I never thought about it again. It didn't impress.
So this is actually very important. This is something I'm noticing. A lot of people who are having this brush with the phenomenon,
Right.
they often describe dying, near-death experiences.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I didn't realize before you
plenty
actually had a
myself.
near-death experience. What happened?
I had two. When I was 10 years old, I was shot with a shotgun, point blank, 6 foot away. Blew a hole in my back that big.
Did you die?
Well, I thought I was dead.
Did you have that light down the tunnel experience?
No, what happened was when I woke up, I was in the hospital. It was a farmer that took me to the hospital. This was in 1972. There wasn't much way.
That's before
back then,
they
I
had
was down in the
near-death
woods. I got
experience
shot.
type
He
of
took me to the hospital, and
stuff.
I thought the whole time I was dead. It was traumatic for a little 10-year-old with a gunshot, and I'm bleeding to death.
Sure.
So when I woke up, it was after surgery, and it was on a cold metal table where they x-ray you. They kept taking me
Those
in and
are
out of
cold.
surgery to look for more lead. They didn't have this stuff then. But the last time they did it, I woke up and I saw my mother looking through a window at me. But my memory was of being inside of something in outer space, looking back at Earth from a distance.
So you had that out-of-body experience?
Yeah.
It's a very common thing. Have you met
I've
other
had
people
those.
who've had near-death experiences?
Yes, a lot.
It's a very common thing, isn't it?
Yep. And believe it or not, something I found was pattern. And I have 18 years worth of data, 18 years worth of data, and thousands of people write me. I have 20,000 emails I haven't even opened yet. That's how many people are writing. But they want to tell me their story. And all of them, just about all, will always, if you start digging into what was your life like when you saw that orb. This lady, Miss Joan, she's 80. She calls me. "I hear you're the guy that knows about these lights." I said, "That would be me. How can I help you?" She's like, "Well, I was standing at my kitchen sink, and this ball of light came by my window, scared me to death, and all this." And I'm like, "Miss Joan, what was happening to you when that happened in your life?" She said, "Well, my husband died the week before." I said, "There you go. It's always that way. It's trauma, near death, or some suffering, PTSD, that brings these things. That's the common pattern."
So do you think we're all wrong when in the popular culture we assume that UAPs, unidentified anomalous
UFOs.
phenomena as it's called, are
Jeez.
aliens or something non-human?
I think there's both.
Yeah,
I think there's both. I think there's
yeah.
so
It's all
much we
the
can't
above.
fathom. I think it's full of life and layers of life. Just like in a drop of water, to on your pillow, to on the ground, there's just life everywhere. So I believe there's probably no telling what's out there. But these orbs that are connected to consciousness, that knows your thoughts, they know what we're thinking. You can't fool them. And they hear it, you know, I call them in, I ask them to come in prayer by connecting my heart. That what makes you cry of joy, that when you can feel that, that's when they come.
Now, there's been, obviously, a determined campaign to show that you're a liar. And I was what really shocked me about it is, even if you were confused or misleading yourself or outright lying,
Right.
what struck me was the vehemence and the nastiness of so much of the response. Why is there such hostility to these ideas?
You know, I've grappled with that, Ross, for many years. And I used to get so angry because nobody wanted to hear what I had to say. And the more I said it, the worse it got. You know, I got ostracized from my church and everything else. But I learned that these people are uninformed.
So there was a
I
period
mean,
of...
there are different categories, and there's different types of UFO, spirit, magic. I don't like. Let's see. It isn't all technology. It's not. A lot of stuff is spirit stuff that happens and magic. It goes beyond technology, but there are different categories. Some people, see angels. Some people see extraterrestrials. Greens, grays, other types of creatures, etc. And some, have evil type of ETs happenings that happens to them. What he has is one category, and stuff like that, where he has the angelic experience. And I've had that, and I've had evil experiences. I've had all different types as well. So I mean, this is just one type. Let's see. If people want to see more about this, go here to News Nation. Chris Bledsoe. Let's see, NASA mission study orbs and stuff like that. And seeing UFOs and stuff like that is the most awesome thing. It's a beautiful thing. You just know that you're not alone in this universe, multiverse that we live in, and everything. But I think I'm gonna go on to our stuff because, I got my beliefs. He's got his beliefs. I don't feel like just countering everything because he's right about what I know that he's right about what he said. I know I write about some stuff that I've said from my own experiences. There's different categories to contact with UFOs, ETs, or spirits, angels, or other types of beings out there. For everybody, it can be different for each person and stuff. So, let me see here. 1, 2. Let's see. Let's try this.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back.
This is Down to Earth with Christian Harloff. UAP, UFO news, stuff like that. I don't like to give anybody credence that uses stupid UAP. I hate that. God, I hate that. I do. I know much more than usually these people do too, because of my own experiences. But anyways, let's. Okay, I don't know. Burleson says he told to Lockheed Martin technology. Yeah, let's see.
Back to Down to Earth with me, Christian Harloff. Burleson is back, and he's been doing interviews, having conversations, and he said there's been some more information, not only about Lockheed Martin and new technology that we might have, but also in regards to Lockheed Martin, the Tic Tac. So, stuff that he's hearing. So let me play this interview from this podcast. This is courtesy of the UAP James Twitter feed, who found this particular clip. But I wanted to play this. Let's get into it and talk about it afterwards.
I've had two people come to me that say that the Tic Tac is a Lockheed Martin creation. The latest person that came to me says he has video of the first, second, and third iteration of the Tic Tac, and he's going to show me. So I'm trying to set that up. The way he describes it is that they had a prototype, they've made changes to it, they've made it more advanced, and then now it's in iteration number 3, which I did see a photo of, and it looks like pretty advanced military like craft, like a plane, but it's clearly human made. It's nothing that I've ever seen, our military has, but his claim is that they have discovered a propulsion that's a new type of propulsion. They used it in the first iteration, which was the Tic Tac. They have an intermediary one that they are more advanced with, and then now they're putting it inside of what looks conventional, so that it's not obvious.
Disguise. Oh, that's interesting.
What it sounds like is that we may have gotten stuff re-engineered. It sounds like, I don't know, maybe that where sometimes we work with ETs and they give us something else to work with. We make new metals, new energy, stuff like that. Constant re-engineering, and we made something new. I guess not just Lockheed Martin that makes this stuff, though. You have Northrop Grumman, you have a lot of other defense contractors that's making these UFO devices. So
saying eventually the tech makes its way into things that we're already familiar with.
Well, this is the kind of stuff that you go, yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, because if you have this company that's been working on this, the follow-up question I would have had was, especially for Burleson, is, okay, so you're sitting down and you're hearing these things about these different types of technologies, whether it's from Avi Loeb, whether it's from Eric Davis, whether it's from these different people who are telling you these things as far as NHI, and David Grush, who works for you, telling you that they have various reports of non-human craft and other things. Is it indeed possible that the stuff that Lockheed Martin has, which has been rumored, the stuff that they have gotten throughout the decades of research, that is essentially how they came up with anti-gravity stuff, and the reverse engineering, the Immaculate Constellation programs, all those different things, leading into the fact that maybe indeed the stuff that we did see in 2017, the Tic Tac videos, those things, were indeed Lockheed Martin trying this stuff out, because you would want complete silence on it. You would want,
you're not the only ones,
let them keep talking about it, let them keep discussing what it is, say it's balloons, say this. If you have that kind of money and you're essentially running things and you don't have anybody really to answer to, and you're essentially equipping the government with this type of tech, it all lines up for sure. If you look at it that particular way, there's just more follow-ups. It's not, I don't think it's as cut and dry as to say, well, Lockheed Martin's the ones who came up with it, it's their stuff, that's it. That's all it ever is. It's other technology, it's our technology, it's advanced technology, that's it. How and when did they discover this type of technology? When was the breakthrough? when you look at like how Oppenheimer broke through and the stuff that he did in regards to how we eventually with the atom and what that led to, and how much at what point did he discover that, realize that, study that, go back and forth with other colleagues to eventually get to where they got to. And that's the same thing here. Like, did they break through at one point? Was there someone in particular that broke through? Or did they find stuff? Did they find things that they said, maybe it's a combination of both. Yes, the Roswell thing did happen. They did find stuff. It was the only thing that ever happened. They found from there, because there's so many different like strange puzzle pieces that you don't know if they're ever is it the same puzzle? Is it a different puzzle? I always remember the interview. I think it was who was it?
This is a big question I don't understand. So many people have questions. Did they this? Did they get that? I already know that we have stuff. I wish I had done this 20 years ago because I'd have a lot more followers. I would and stuff. God, man. Jesus Christ. Anyways.
I always pronounce her name wrong. But she had said that there was... that this is essentially these craft that were left were almost like gifts. Like someone saying, here's a Rubik's Cube. You can have it. It's yours. We're not going to tell you to use it. But here it is. Figure it out. See if you can put all the colors together. And that is what could be where we are leading here. Now, going back to this interview and the things that he's saying, does it make sense that this could indeed be Lockheed Martin who has this type of craft?
I'm way far ahead of him. Way too ahead of him. Let me see. Anyways, we have different contractors working on different technologies, magic stuff as well. So it's not just Lockheed Martin is a major part with stuff, whether it be Area 51 or other places. You got Northrop Grumman, lots of other defense contractors, etc. You got Raytheon as well. So many different defense contractors. Boeing.
The fact is, there's something out there that is much more sophisticated.
I have not seen this before, so I don't put much stock into what physicists, scientists have to say about this stuff, because a lot of stuff I already know about, and it doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't. I just know stuff, so it doesn't matter. But anyways, I want to just hear her out. Let's see, AI alien. Let's see. I wonder. I just wonder.
Than we can even comprehend. And one of your only options is that they're watching us and waiting.
When we look at where we are in our developmental history, we've come a long way, we've advanced a lot. And when we look into our near future, say the next million years, we think we've got enormous potential to become much bigger and more impactful and much more visible and obvious. People have estimated you could colonize the whole galaxy in less than a million years. And the universe is 14 billion years old, so something's weird, because if life were everywhere else and all those other places could easily have done what we did, then
why haven't they done it?
So there's this question, where is everybody?
For most things, there are explanations, but there does remain a category of things for which there are no explanations we yet have.
After a billion years of expansion, these would be like huge volumes in space that would be just really obvious.
If something originated elsewhere and got here, that means it also got other places.
Which is a problem.
Tell me.
The key thing is, why hang out at the edge of visibility? They are domesticating us.
Hold on 1 second. Hi, I'm Maya Bialik.
I'm Jonathan Cohen.
Welcome to our breakdown. today I feel broken down by what's about to happen.
Let's just not bury the lead. It's possible that aliens are here observing us for the purpose of domesticating us so that we don't leave the planet and go explore the solar system.
That's not necessarily
that's
the way
one
that I
thing
would
could
lead into today's episode.
I could lead into that with our government. And I know that ETs don't like monkeys mucking up space. That is a fact, and I do see that. I mean, but then again, ETs are running amok. They're not perfect either. Listen, there was, I did a video last night about Enforcer TV, lying about me, my past, my father, and stuff like that. And I had to get this done because on different platforms, I've had to get rid of people and stuff. I've deleted even accounts before and stuff. I've purged hundreds of subscribers at a time before, etc. And I got, I don't know, downvote from some idiot last night about what I said about getting these guys into a boxing ring. If you don't like what I say or what I do, maybe unpleasant, but I have to. Go, unsubscribe, and don't come back. I do a lot of different stuff. I do adult industry, stuff on sex, paranormal, real news, etc. But I'm not going to have some idiot, be a pussy, not say anything, and just downvote or whatever. I don't respect people like that and stuff. And I have a right to say what I said about those punk-ass sons of bitches. Lied about me and stuff like that. People don't have a right to just lie and make up stuff about you without something happening back. So, best thing to do is to unsubscribe and never come back. Capiche? I hope you get that. Now let's move on.
Episode, but that's not untrue. We have on a professor today who was a research associate at the Future of Humanity Institute of Oxford University. He's got a doctorate from Caltech. He's a physicist, also a social scientist, and spent 9 years as a research programmer at Lockheed and NASA. And his specialty that we're going to be talking about today is a fascinating exploration into not just the possibility that aliens exist, but the statistical analysis and theoretical conceptual framework that we all need to have in order to understand how we got here, how our planet has produced life, and the very, very real statistical possibility that we are not alone in the universe. And the question is, what do we do differently now that we know that? How do we interact with each other? How do we understand our motives? And how do we wrap our heads around the fact that we are likely currently either being observed or existing alongside an artificial intelligence driven alien universe?
That might all sound wild, but
it's wild.
It's also fairly grounded in the way that he explains it.
Our guest is Robin Hanson. He's a professor at George Mason University in Washington, D.C. He has a blog, overcomingbias.com, with 8 million visits. He's a speaker. He's a writer. His books include The Age of M, Work, Love, and Life When Robots Rule the Earth, and his most recent book, The Elephant in the Brain, Hidden Motives in Everyday Life, that he co-authored with Kevin Simler, which is a really, really great read, which we're not going to touch on in detail today because we really, really want to get to what is going on with this new framework for understanding our place in the universe and how that can change how we view our current life.
The other part of the episode that really stuck out to me is thinking about the trends in the advancement and evolution of humankind as it relates to artificial intelligence and really how we, I guess, move along the spectrum of advancement. And he thinks about it not in terms of the specifics, but in terms of the macro trends. And when you think about the macro trends, you're able to zoom out a little bit and get a picture of where we might go in a few hundred years and then even a few thousand years. And I find that to be truly fascinating.
It's a pleasure to welcome to the Breakdown Robin Hanson.
Break it down.
Robin Hanson, welcome to the Breakdown.
Great to be here.
Your book, The Elephant in the Brain, in particular, is dealing with so many aspects of what it means to be human. But one of your main areas of expertise is about something really outside of our normal human understanding. You believe that we have found already alien life in the solar system.
I've seen studies of asteroids and the microfossils.
We see the asteroids. That's a start.
And they seem convincing to me. When people say, why don't they believe that? The usual answers I hear is, oh, we just need a really high standard of evidence for this. And I go, why? They say, because it's important. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean you should hold an extra high standard of evidence. It seems like what's going on is that this topic of, is there life off of Earth?
That's not a question. Let's see. I'm going to go over. I've gone over this. I've been wanting to. Let's see. Randall Carlson, is the moon an artificial satellite? I need to move on to some real stuff here. And this is going to be a bit interesting. I mean, he has his opinions on stuff as well. Let me see here. Randall Carlson, which is Jesse Michaels. I'm not going to do much on this unless people really get in on this stuff. Let me see. Shout out to Jesse Michaels. The moon doesn't make sense.
Mammoth stood 16 feet tall at the shoulder. The Ursus Spalius, the bear that stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder and 12 feet tall when it stood up on its hind legs. There were giants. But if you had all of these mammalian megafauna, oversized compared to today, why not people?
Facts. But I want some more intelligent stuff. But some stuff he doesn't put two together, but some stuff he is just ultra smart right on some stuff. But anyways,
interviewing me.
Yes, thank you.
Humans dedicated to.
Hold on.
And I do this just for I'll say to people.
That's go back again.
Called you randomly from time to. You probably know me as a guy that call you, sporadically.
Yeah, right. Sometimes my phone will ring. Oh God, it's Jesse Michaels again. Hey, Jesse. No, I'm always happy to get a call from you, Jesse.
Thanks, man.
So far,
Jesse Michaels.
I love our conversations. We talk about some trippy out there stuff. Speaking of which, I've been on a weird kind of rabbit hole, and I've been thinking about the moon, and I think the moon doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I would agree.
Okay.
I would totally agree that it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. What's up with the moon? It is way less dense than the Earth. The material predates the Earth, and yet it's supposed to have come from the Earth itself, from some sort of asteroid impact, so that doesn't make sense. There were reverberations when the lunar lander hit it, both in Apollo 12 and in Apollo 13. You had ringing.
And when meteoroids strike it, same thing. While those Apollo in place seismometers were on the moon, I think for 3 or 4 years NASA was able to gather data, and yes, it shows that the moon has a long vibrational train.
Yes.
After like 10 times or more that of, say, the Earth.
You have uranium-236 and chromium and titanium on the moon. These are sort of
all the minerals,
high
resources
refractory
there.
metals.
It's very strange. And then it feels almost like, this perfect ball, and it orbits in this perfect way where you never see the dark side of the moon.
If you ask people, and I do this just for the fun, I'll say to people, does the moon rotate on its axis? And most people go. And they can't conceptualize in any way that allows them to even answer the question. Does it? Well, yes. Okay, it does. Okay. Or no. Well, let's say, because most people now, unlike our ancestors of long ago, don't pay much attention to the moon.
Yeah.
Our ancestors all over the ancient world paid obsessive attention to the moon.
Yeah, they did.
They built huge
Gods,
structures
mausoleums,
and monuments dedicated to observing the motions of the moon.
Yeah.
And they did this all over the world. Why? Why were they so interested in the moon? Why were they so intrigued with the moon that they would create these large astronomy observatories that would allow
This
them...
is the thing. I mean, back when a lot of our peoples knew of ET, some tribes knew of ETs and stuff like that. And I believe there's a lot of that psychic part of us where we just know that there's stuff happening in space and everything, that we're not alone, that there's life out there. And that includes the moon for different reasons, whether it be ETs or not, or other reasons, or just because we like to look. We want to be up there. Humans are explorers. We're social, we're explorers, and we want to search the stars. We're always looking up, for those of us that do, like me, look at the sky saying, I don't belong here. I don't belong here on Earth. Some of us don't even belong here with humans. And it's like, there's stuff happening out there in space. And it's like, I want to go there, I want to see that star, etc. And stuff.
To track, for example, the 18.6 year lunar cycle between maximum rising and setting, minimum rising and setting, which takes it takes 18.6 years to go through the full cycle. And to put it into a very, what I would think of as kind of a comprehensible motion, is you've got a minimum rising, a minimum setting, a maximum rising, a maximum setting. And it goes like this. Does that make sense what I'm doing?
Yeah,
it goes maximum.
But wait, moves like that. Yeah.
Like maximum rise, minimum set. Maximum set, minimum rise. And it oscillates like that back and forth. Right. It takes 18.6 years. Give or take a few days, to complete that full cycle. There's a place that we'll go to at some point in Colorado called Chimney Rock. We can pull up a slide of it a little bit later if you'd like. It's two natural pillars. Huge pillars are 1,000 feet above the valley floor. And they're connected by a ridge. And you can go up that ridge, and where the ridge sort of flattens out before you get to these two huge pinnacles of rock, there's the remnants of an ancient structure there, an ancient kiva that would have been built by the Chacoan people. And this was one of the Chacoan outliers, part of the whole Chacoan civilization that was pretty much covered the 10,000 square miles of the San Juan Basin in New Mexico, whose hub was Chaco Canyon.
Way ahead of us.
And there was a whole series of outliers that were places of observation, high pinnacle points that would have been probably used as a communication system. We can pull some of this up and I can show you some of these slides. You'll kind of see how it worked. But at Chimney Rock, the remains of a kiva are there, and if you position yourself at the right location within that kiva, which is circular, you peer through those two pinnacle rocks, and it marks that position where you will see every 18.6 years, you will see the moon rising in between those two rocks. And that's coming up later this year. So I'm thinking
This was
a little
earlier
trip
this month
out
ago, I
there.
believe,
And
about
the
a month
park,
ago.
it's a national monument, I believe. The Park Service that governs it is going to open it up so people can actually hike up the ridge and get in that position and see the event.
Let's go.
I think it's...
Let's go.
I think...
But I won't let you go, Randall.
Oh, hold on just a second. I didn't take a leak. Just a retreat real quick. Hold on.
what's up with the moon? It's really strange. Also the more dense material on the moon is above the less dense material, which is the opposite of the Earth, and it's similar to like a digging or excavation site.
Well,
actually, the thing that got me onto this is there's a remote viewer named Ingo Swann.
Yes, I've heard of him.
And he wrote a book called Penetration, and he was part of the CIA's psychic spy program called Stargate. And the latter half of the book, Penetration, is dedicated to his thoughts on the moon.
Okay.
And he thought that the moon was a hollow spaceship. And there are other legends that involve the moon being a hollow artificial satellite or spaceship around the Earth. And there's actually a Zulu legend that the moon brought us out of the Younger Dryas, and it made the climate stable on Earth. So let's say
the moon absolutely does help to stabilize the climate.
It does.
That's a well-known fact. I can have a whole book up there on that.
And you've seen evidence of various gaseous activity on the moon that's sort of unexplainable?
Oh, yeah, the lunar transient phenomena. There's hundreds of examples of the moon outgassing carbon dioxide, outgassing water vapor, things like that. So anomalous lights, things. It really looks like there's some kind of activity on the moon right now.
Yes.
I don't know the explanation for it. I don't know why carbon dioxide is being outgassed from the moon. But carbon dioxide seems to suggest, carbon dioxide you associate with plants, with vegetation, water vapor.
Well, the
coming
moon,
out of the moon.
The moon's super weird. So Apollo 10, right? It took off from the moon and it rang like a bell. And NASA became very confused. Then in Apollo 11, they put seismometers in the moon to measure this effect. They intentionally crashed the booster, the first stage of the lunar module in Apollo 11 back onto the moon, and it rings like a bell for 3 hours.
3 hours.
So they're like, what the hell's going on here? And it turns out that if you excavate, if you dig on the moon, lower sediment layers on the moon actually are newer than higher sediment layers. So it's the exact inverse, and it actually pattern matches to an excavation site. So you think that there might be a little camp out from this past civilization on the moon?
But in the spirit of the outrageous hypothesis, let's consider it.
Okay, I like that.
Yes.
And so why haven't we gone back? 1969 to 1972, we went on all these cool missions. You had the NASA Saturn program, the Apollo programs, and we don't see...
From what I heard, there's just too much classified stuff happening. UFOs were following us around with the Apollo landings. They were all over us. The landing and everything else, they were swarming. Just about following us around and everything. The astronauts reported all the time seeing UFOs around our craft, our lunar module and stuff like that. And that's very hard to censor out, airbrush out, and stuff like that with the NASA and stuff like that. So, that is, from what I heard from the dark side of the moon as well, that they got base there as well as the bright side and stuff like that. And they didn't like us being there as well. They did not like us being there. Different stories I've heard.
Seem to be able to go back. You even have NASA admins saying we lost the technology. That's not even like a controversial conspiratorial thing to say.
Right.
The more conspiratorial thing would be that it was a hoax or whatever.
The more prosaic explanation is that Nixon decided to pull the plug on the Apollo program because the Vietnam War was costing us so much money and we were going into debt that he didn't feel like we had enough money to continue the program. So they decommissioned the whole Saturn rocket fleet, which was really dumb and stupid, but that's what they did. And so, you could make the argument that the Vietnam War won out over the Apollo program.
Sorry.
There was probably more to it than that, but
there was a lot.
I don't know what that would be unless
That was just
something was found that, you know.
However, what might have been found?
I don't know.
And there are civilizations pre-moon that talk about the moon not existing, and then there's Sumerians talk about the pre-moon civilizations, and so what's up?
That I don't think that means what people think it means, because here's why. I think that it means something very interesting. But obviously, if you had the moon arriving into Earth orbit during the time that humans would be here, the arrival of the moon into Earth's orbit would be an extraordinary event, and it would be profoundly catastrophic.
So how do you think the moon formed?
That's part of the mystery.
Come on, Randall.
Well, see, I don't necessarily have all the answers on that, but
Yeah,
I
we
will
got
say
something.
this. As far as the moon, the structure of the moon, you're right that the moon is much less dense, is slightly more than half as dense as the Earth. So the interesting thing about the moon is if you get enough mass together, the gravitational attraction will overcome the resistance to deformation of the material. What that means is that if you have a small object, like say for example, an astronomical object like Phobos or Deimos, the moons of Mars, they're not spherical. There's not enough mass there to overcome the rigidity of the material.
Hey, American Alchemy fans! After years of trying pretty much every shaving product under the sun, I finally.
As if it's locked into a single moment of inertia, as if it hasn't done that. Say the
and before and after set. So stop wasting money and time on shaving products that don't look good, aren't effective, and cost way too much. Visit houseofatlas.com today. Trust me, you'll love it as much as I did.
There's not enough mass there that the gravity attraction, the internal gravity, can overcome the resistance of the material and cause it to deform. Somewhere between, say, the moons of Mars and the moons of the Earth, you will get enough mass where it does overtake, the gravity will overwhelm the rigidity of the material. It will deform into the shape which requires the least energy to maintain, which is a sphere. The mass of the moon is sufficient to do that, yet it hasn't done that. How do we know that? Well, there's a number of ways we know that. The most prominent way we know that is the fact that there is 2 moments of inertia in the moon. Let's see, grab like one of those wooden compasses off the top right there. I think, yeah, one of those. Let's see, will that work? Is there another? Let's see, there should be. Is there anything else up there tubular?
Good pen.
That'll work. That'll work. Okay, so now I'm going to hold this pen as if it's locked into a single moment of inertia that coincides with its center of mass. Okay, now what I want you to do is try to grab each end of the pen and try to rotate it. No, rotate it in the horizontal.
Yeah,
See, you're going to easily overcome my resistance. I'm going to resist, and you. See, I can't. Okay. Now,
the point.
Rotate it in the same plane.
Yeah, something happened.
1 moment of inertia, 2 moments of inertia.
Right.
Okay, what you are, okay, so here is a spherically, radially symmetrical object. Let's imagine it is a sphere, and this is an axis, and you are Earth's gravity field. So, again, rotate it. Very little resistance, right? But now you're Earth's gravity field, and there's 2 moments of inertia.
Yeah.
So, what's happened there is the moon is locked into Earth's gravity field in a 1-to-1 coupling between the spin of the moon on its axis and its revolution about the Earth. 1-to-1 spin orbit coupling. The moon has sufficient mass and low density that it should have deformed into the state of least energy, which is a sphere.
Why hasn't it done that, Randall?
Why hasn't it done that?
What do you think?
Because there's obviously two moments of inertia.
So why, and how do you explain the two?
That's
moments of
yeah,
inertia?
that's,
It's a
yeah,
natural
that
object.
sounds right. Actually,
Well, we have to come up with a. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a natural object. What I'm
Right.
saying though is that the laws of physics, as we know it, don't seem to be applying here.
Yeah.
And if there's a natural explanation, I don't know what it is.
Do you have any unnatural
Right.
theories?
Not really. I'm not ready to go into some of the, that the moon is
Craziness.
an artificial object.
Okay.
Right.
I am willing to consider that the moon has been geoengineered.
Okay. And how would it have been geoengineered?
Yeah.
Well, by a civilization with the technology advanced enough that they would be able to.
Do you think Atlantis geoengineered it?
Well, now you're.
Come on. Yeah.
It's very speculative. But now we get into the question of could there have been a civilization in the remote past that had technologies that we currently don't know about?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is yes.
I
That's
say
a
so,
plausible
yes.
hypothesis
Yes, it is, yes.
that is not warranted by just summarily dismissing.
How would they have geoengineered the moon?
Well, if you look at the schemes for building lunar bases, have you ever looked at any of NASA's ideas for building
I
lunar
have.
bases?
No.
I have.
I should pull up something here. If I've got it handy, I will pull it up.
Not the
Basically,
too
the main
recent, though.
problem with building a colony on the moon or any kind of a facility on the moon is cosmic radiation.
Right.
Right.
So how do you solve the problem of cosmic radiation to which you are going to be subject on the surface of the moon?
You need some protective shielding, maybe
Yeah,
a
lead type
magnetic
or something, yeah.
protective
You
shielding.
could, which means you're thinking immediately something like one of the schemes is, and if I can find it here, I'll pull it up. One of the schemes is a dome-like structure.
Yeah,
Right.
something like that.
Right.
Yes, you could do that. Or what would be another possibility?
Geoengineering.
Go underground.
Underground.
So there you go. So it could be this hollow
Yeah.
structure. Interesting.
The-
Hollow is
Okay.
an oversimplification.
Okay. So there may be hollow parts of it.
Now I
Yeah.
think you're getting onto the.
Well, there's some people who are high up at NASA who have said
say,
there are
there
hollow parts of the moon, and that's the only explanation for it.
Yeah. I mean, this has actually been known since the Apollo days. Has been speculated. It was Gordon McDonald, I think, was his name.
That's
One of the-
right, Gordon McDonald.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He was the one who first said that it's more like a hollow sphere.
that's right. And there's a famous space advisor, I think he was NASA affiliated, to Eisenhower, named Gordon McDonald, who said the only way that
I've read his work.
the only way that the moon makes any sense is if it's hollow.
But that's an oversimplified model. Like if you picture a basketball that has an outer shell,
It has-
but completely empty inside.
It has maybe compartments or something. Do you think there are Atlantean survivors within the moon?
He says with a grin.
Yeah, why'd you have to go there,
Sly
dude?
grin.
You already said yes on my show, and 800,000 people watched that.
Did I say that?
You said,
You
well,
sure
there's
did.
a loaded question, Jesse. And then you go, well, yes.
Do you believe
yeah.
that there are survivors of ancient Atlantis that are among us,
Yes,
perhaps
yeah.
with underwater bases or bases on the moon and advanced technology?
Now there's the loaded question, Jesse. I will just say very provisional.
That's right there.
Yes.
Well, let's put it this way. If there were ancient cultures, whether it was Atlantis or not, that's a separate question.
Yeah, it
I think
is.
that questioning the existence of Atlantis is definitely valid.
Right.
If we go through and we take line by line our primary source for information on Atlantis, which is Plato's two dialogues,
Yeah,
and
advanced
we actually
technology.
break it down line by line, we look at the multiple translations, we look at even going back to the original Greek to determine some of the possible alternative translations of some of the words.
So I think we can do that, but that's a conversation you've had with other people, and I feel like you have sort of evidence that is, in the form of these sort of archaeological ruins that will always be hotly contested, and are sort of hard to prove that was Atlantis because the actual survivors have been washed away. And then you have all these crazy UFO reports, and if there are any survivors that are on the moon or in underwater bases or anything like that, I almost feel like, especially given the current zeitgeist, that might be a more productive inroad into the Atlantis conversation.
You know, I like to think outrageously sometimes, in the spirit of outrageous hypotheses. You know, William R. Davis, who was the founding father of the science of geomorphology, back in the 20s, I believe it was, excoriated his colleagues for being overly conservative in their thinking and not willing to consider
outside
new
the
ideas.
box.
And he wrote a very famous paper called, which you might want to read. I bet you could find it as a PDF form on Google. It's called The Value of Outrageous Hypotheses.
Love that.
Yeah. So, in the spirit of outrageous hypotheses, why don't we conjecture that given the at least 150 to 200,000 years that we modern humans have been on this earth, that consistent with a lot of the myths, flight was not discovered back in by the Wright brothers, but was rediscovered by, here's the perspective that I kind of consider. If we look
what's really outrageous is my family, some of my family, and some stuff that I've done, remote viewing, going into the past. I've gone like thousands of years in the past, stuff like that, and family stuff like that, talking about levitation, psychic stuff, us, even me at one time, even being able to fly or crazy stuff like that and everything, and how the only thing that limits us so much is the flesh, the human body, and stuff like that, or spirits can go outside the body, or there are ways of controlling the body where we can levitate, use ki, chi, or whatever, and stuff like that. And I come from some of that stuff, stuff from Greece and all this other stuff, and Asia as well, all this type of stuff. So,
the dominance of just feudalism, of subsistence farming, that was up until the 1800s, and the scientific enlightenment, followed by the Industrial Revolution. That was pretty much 99% of the Earth's population. When my grandparents were born in the 1890s, the primary mode of transportation, aside from rail, was foot, horse, mule, ships, of course, but obviously nobody had. The first automobiles, I guess, were just showing up in the mid-1890s.
Yeah, right.
But then, when I was born, there was no computers. We had no presence in space.
A sailor
if you look at how far and fast we've come scientifically in the last 200 years, and then if you were to think that, what if a cataclysm wiped out our modern civilization? And we had archaeologists coming and digging up, looking for, prehistory 10,000 years prior. Well, would they find any evidence that we were even here? And the answer is, it depends on the severity and the intensity and magnitude of these events. Now, if we start talking about the Younger Dryas, I think we can safely state that the Younger Dryas was a global catastrophe. And it involved multiple factors, all of which would have done their part very effectively to erase any kind of civilization that might have existed, at least anything that might have looked like ours. Let's put it this way, if the Younger Dryas events were to be repeated now, 10,000 years from now, archaeologists would have a hard time finding any evidence that we were ever even here. So what I'm getting at is that I think that you can interpret the evidence that there is a strong case for the existence of Atlantis. Now, if we look at what happened with Ancient Apocalypse, Graham Hancock's show, it got attacked on multiple fronts. It's all the establishment coming out, and of course, if you dissect their attacks on the show, there's no substance to them. It's just name calling. It's every logical fallacy in the book, right? But if you go back to the original accounts, there's nothing there that's really so implausible that it couldn't have existed in some form or another.
Well, the objections people
sense.
have are,
It actually makes
was
sense.
told that sort of a mythos festival, right, in the Timaeus and Crataeus account. And so, you know, there was a question of like how true the actual telling was. And then the other sort of argument is they were supposed to have fought a war, I think, against Athens. And Athens wasn't around, you know, sort of 9,000 years prior.
You've got a whole bunch of assumptions.
Yeah.
If you go back to, you know, the late Ice Age times, you know, you go back to the times that Plato is talking about.
Satyr times.
And his date is very interesting. You know,
I know
9,000 years
but-
before Solon's exile to Egypt, right, which occurred in 600 BC.
So the 9,600 BC, which is the end of the Younger Dryas.
Right,
Yeah.
precisely, the end of the Younger Dryas and Meltwater Pulse 1b.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. If you are going through something, anything, I always think talking about it helps. I've also always believed that taking care of your mental well-being is as essential as staying physically fit, especially when life keeps you on the go. For me, it's interviews, projects, and travel. Sometimes you just need to blow off some steam. I've seen firsthand how a solid support system can transform your day to day. Traditional therapy costs anywhere from $100 to $250 per session. It often takes a lot of time to book the sessions. It's hard to know who's a quality therapist. BetterHelp makes weekly therapy perfectly accessible with a flat weekly fee that saves you a lot of time and money. You get instantly matched up with an amazing therapist, and you can vet them based on their track record. What I really appreciate is how easy it is to connect with one of BetterHelp's over 30,000 licensed therapists. No waiting rooms, no rigid scheduling, just guidance and support delivered online. Whether you're tackling everyday stress, managing anxiety, or simply looking to build better coping skills, don't let these things fester or build up. BetterHelp provides a straightforward, affordable way to get the care you deserve. Your well-being is worth it. It's the most important thing in your life, even more important than aliens. So visit BetterHelp.com/alchemypod today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/alchemypod. ALCHEMYPOD. After you sign up, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. That would go a long way.
Now, to me, that is quite an amazing coincidence that you have a very rapid pulse of sea level rise. At the same time, Plato is saying that there were islands in the Atlantic that sank due to seismic events.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've done is gone in and...
It's known around the world where ancient tribes, you know, around the world have spoken about an ancient flood or a series of ancient floods that happened and everything. So it makes sense that there was an Atlantis and everything. It just seems like I could just go back in time sometimes and see some of these places. I did that with Greece where I went back in time and stuff. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Much appreciated. Too bad I can't exactly see on the stream, but I appreciate it. Thank you. It makes sense with all these floods and everything. You're talking about how in Hawaii, the islands over tens of thousands of years or so go underwater and they rise up and they go down. The volcanic activity where islands will rise and go back down. And then of course you have, you know, the ice age and stuff like that causing flooding, etc. It just makes sense. And where I've even had stuff where I've gone in the past, I've seen stuff with Greece. And I see that on television and I could it's like I went back in time in some ways, and I was able to, and I saw on television, I was going like, what the fuck did I just do? I saw something that happened like thousands of years ago. I saw this one site in ancient Greece and stuff like that. And it's just crazy.
Studied the marine geology and oceanography of the Atlantic Ocean basin, and it's right there. There is overwhelming evidence of major subsidence on the floor of the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, particularly concentrated along the mid-Atlantic ridge.
You don't happen to have any slides around this, do you, Randall?
Well, I do.
Really?
I actually do, yeah.
Should we get into it?
I'd love to, you know.
While you're pulling that up, Randall, do you think that there's any sort of sacred geometry about the human body that allows it to tap in?
Yes, yes.
What is it? What is that?
Well, it's primarily the golden section, also known as the divine proportion, where also known as the extreme and mean ratio, which is basically, well, this right here actually is a compass that demonstrates that ratio, where the ratio of the small segment to the large segment is exactly the same as the ratio of the large segment to the whole.
You know what else displays that? The moon.
How so?
I believe that the moon is 1/400th the size of the sun or something, or what? You tell me. What is it? It's the distance between the.
You have a proportional relationship between diameters and distance.
Yes.
The sun is 400 times larger than the moon and 400 times farther away.
Okay, so what's up with that?
Yes.
There we go.
That's weird.
mean, what is up with that?
I don't know.
Is up?
I've been thinking about that for decades.
That's what you're here to tell me,
Yes.
Like,
Randall.
what is up with that?
That's weird.
How is it that, well, see, what's up, see, here we get into the fact that that's just one interesting item in a whole array of weird coincidences about this reality that we inhabit. When we look at the whole solar system, the whole solar system looks curiously like a work of architecture. Like when you begin looking at the ratios of planetary sizes, masses, distances, there's some really interesting things going on,
Like
which
what?
if you change the parameters even a little bit, for example, the masses and distance spacing of the 4 larger outer planets are precisely what they need to be to transfer comets from the inner zone of the Kuiper disk into the inner solar system. If you were to change the spacing or the masses, this whole phenomena of capturing comets out of the Kuiper disk, transferring them into the inner solar system, would cease.
Why would it?
I think that's right by Mars, Kuiper. Disk. Solar system. Kuiper belt. Yeah, he calls it disk, but yeah. So this is a circumstellar disk in the solar system, orbits around Neptune, approximately 58 from the sun. Let's see, 50 years, larger 20 times. That's larger 20 times, wide 20 times, 200 times. Okay, 2,200 times massive. Like the asteroid belt consists mainly of here. I used to go over this all the time when I was young. Saturation. Right.
Comet airburst from the Taurid meteor stream
Well,
correlate
it
with
wouldn't. It
solar
would
storms?
not on the Earth, but if you have a major influx of a cometary mass into the inner solar system, and so here, going back to the Taurid meteor stream, here is right now the idea that's coming from the new catastrophists that actually go back.
Yeah, there's this belt, of course, that's in between Mars and Jupiter, you know, asteroid belt there, and then there's outside, you know, blue, etc. But I believe it's the one that's right outside of Mars. And then there's Jupiter and stuff like that.
Back to 1980 in the British Isles, Victor Klube, William Napier, William Asher, several others, also some Australian astronomers that theorized that about 25 to 30,000 years ago, a gigantic comet, maybe 50 to 60 mile diameter nucleus or even bigger, came. It was captured into a subjovian orbit, meaning that it's traveling around in the inner solar system between the Sun and Jupiter, that this huge comet began to undergo a system of hierarchical system of breakups, forming ever smaller cometary nuclei pieces that then went under, again, another process of breaking up, which ultimately led to the Taurid meteor stream. Now, in the early days of a cometary destruction like that.
This was the Comet Encke?
Comet Encke, no, that's good, that's good. Comet Encke wouldn't have been the progenitor comet. It would have been one of the secondary or tertiary comets from the breakup of the original.
Got it.
Does that make sense? Yes. So in early times, going back 10, 12, 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, this debris has not cleared out. It's very dense within the stream of the Taurid meteor stream. The Earth crosses that stream twice each year. Crosses, so picture this, Jupiter, the Sun. The stream comes around the Sun, it makes its perihelion passage around the Sun, goes out, it loops back in just inside Jupiter, like this, and so it's streaming around like this, and it lays close to the plane of the ecliptic, and Earth passes through that stream twice each year in its orbit. When that stuff is coming from its perihelion passage behind the Sun, the Earth, that's the summertime Taurids, which occur in late June and early July. Now the Earth is moving, and then it comes to the fall time Taurids that are coming in towards the Sun, but coming from apparently space. Now, all meteor streams are named after the constellation that you would look at to see which direction they're emanating from. The Taurids, obviously, are named after the constellation Taurus. And specifically, they're almost, the radiant point is almost targeted right on the Pleiades, which is the shoulder of the bull in the classical depictions. So, in the fall time, oh shit, I forgot to mention that today. We are right now, today, tomorrow, and the next day, in the peak of the Taurid meteor stream.
That's kind of scary.
Well, at this point, most of this stuff has been, it's very diffuse. It's not, however.
But you were answering the question as to why the Sun would be involved.
Here's what I'm getting at. Okay. What we now have is evidence that the infall of meteorites into the Sun can trigger solar outbursts.
So coronal mass ejections because it's intaking mass. Well, that's amazing. Okay, so interesting. So that's sort of this hybrid. That's almost like this Taurid meteor stream sets off a chain of other calamities because you're talking about seismic activity, volcanic activity, sun activity.
Yes, I think that's the way you have to look at it. We're looking at a coherent system. What I think is we're getting to the point where we can now understand kind of almost a unified process where the motion of the planets, the sun, the ingress of cosmic material coming from the Kuiper disk or the Oort cloud can have profound effects on the planets and the sun.
So all of your ideas around, cyclical cataclysms when it comes to the Taurid meteor stream wouldn't be made possible without that sort of architecture to the solar system.
And see, so what happens is, it's the conjunctions of the large outer planets that can perturb the comets in the inner zone of the Kuiper disk, which are in very quasi-stable orbits, which means that if you imagine that you got a flat surface and you put a sphere on it. Well, if you have an impulse in any direction, it can move, right? Now suppose you have a dimple in a flat plane and you put your sphere in there. Well, now it's going to take a whole lot more force to move that, because you've got to overcome the fact that it's sitting in this depression, a basin, see? Suppose, on the other hand, it's sitting on top of a hill, right? And it's sitting there, as long as nothing disturbs it, it sits there precariously perched. But a little bit of force pushed on it, it begins rolling down, right? Quasi-stable. So comets on the inner portion of the Kuiper disk are quasi-stable. So what that means is that the consequence of that is the conjunctions of the large outer planets. When they conjunct, like let's say you have Uranus and then you have Neptune. Okay, so when they're on opposite sides of the orbit, whatever influence they have just is minimal, or it cancels each other out.
Right.
Okay, but now Uranus is on a faster orbit than Neptune, so it's coming along like this, and as it's catching up, the gravity fields of the two objects will combine. Right? Now let's say you've got comets. Picture this big disk, it's rotating slowly about the sun. It's way out there, outside the orbit of Neptune. It's rotating, right? They're not just sitting there, the whole disk is rotating. So now you have Uranus and Neptune, they combine their gravity fields, so the gravity is pulling, and you've got a comet out here, so that combined gravity pulling on that, what's it going to do? It's going to be like putting on the brakes. Okay? Now, on the other hand, let's say that a comet is behind it as you're getting this conjunction, so now these combined masses of Uranus and Neptune are in front of the comet, they're all moving in the same direction. Now the gravity field is pulling, it's going to accelerate. Okay, so now how does the comet then respond to a deceleration or an acceleration? An acceleration will move it to a higher orbital level. It'll speed up and it'll move out. It'll move away from the sun. If it's decelerated, it will move in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
As it slows down, it sort of falls in closer to the sun.
Yeah.
When it does that, it now comes within the zone of the planets. Saturn, Uranus. So now you've got comets within the orbit of Neptune. Think Saturn, Uranus, same thing. If they break, if they slow down the orbits, it'll transfer in, it'll come inside the orbit of Saturn. Now the big daddy, granddaddy of planetary masses is Jupiter. It'll be Jupiter that in most cases is the determinant. Picture Jupiter with the thunderstone.
So Jupiter's sort of the...
Jupiter will grab that comet and either throw it back out
or
towards
fling
the
it in.
outside the planetary orbits, or he'll throw it down towards the sun. Now that comet gets caught in that game of cosmic ping pong where it's back and forth between the Jovian orbit and the sun. So it's doing this. And now what happens is with that transfer of the comet into the zone of the planets.
What determines whether Jupiter throws it towards the sun
same
or out
principle,
of the solar
same
system?
principle.
Okay.
Here's Jupiter, it's going around the sun.
So if
here's
it's
the planet.
accelerating, then it...
Right, here comes the comet. It's rotating this way, and here comes Jupiter. So as it's coming up like this, gravity is pulling on it, slowing it down, and it falls in towards the sun. That's what does it. So it's the huge mass of Jupiter's gravity.
Aren't we about to hit a particularly heavy time for the Taurid meteor stream? Isn't the Earth about
twice
to encounter
each
that?
year the Earth crosses the Taurid meteor stream.
That's what, September?
The end of October. The fall Taurid is sometimes referred to as Halloween meteors. And I've got a whole presentation I did last Halloween, or a day or two before Halloween, where I talked about the connection between the ancient origins of our Halloween celebration and the Taurid meteor shower.
Interesting. How do those connect at all?
Well, because for one, for one of the things, see, like the Earth crosses the Taurid meteor stream twice each year. And actually, after the break, I'll pull up a graphic and I'll show you the graphic.
And what 2 months? So it's September?
No,
Or sorry,
late October,
October,
early November.
Early November.
Takes about a week for Earth to cross.
It's the southern and the northern Taurids are the distinction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then in late June, early July, if you can picture, let's push your cup over here, or the coaster. We can use the coaster. There we go. That'll be the sun.
You know that moment when you slip into something and instantly wonder how you ever lived without it? That's exactly how I felt the first time I put on Chubby's original stretch shorts. The super elastic waistband feels like it was custom.
I'm just so sorry about that. Sorry about that.
And maybe a la Roswell, a lot of our internet technology was sort of dropped by these people to distract us constantly, or not people, but beings. And then there's some other
speculations about the origins of life. Always went to these, boggled at the whole situation, and I tried.
Hold on a second. Be right back.
Try to wrap my head around. And it seems like no matter what explanation I come up with, it's just beyond our ability to even fathom.
Well, do you think that NASA might have figured something out? Because, I mean, obviously there are all these sort of conspiracies around Neil Armstrong comes back, he gives a speech 3 weeks afterwards, and he's giving the speech and he looks he goes, this is a big step for mankind. And he looks very kind of scared and sheepish and like he's been, dragged out there and possibly traumatized, around what he saw. And so, is there something that we're missing in terms of the story with the moon?
I think there's a lot we're missing.
Was this created sort of as a noble mythology around the space race with the Soviets, where we wanted to encourage, maybe rightly so, technological innovation and exploration and the knowledge of a final frontier, but maybe we sacrificed ontological truth in the process?
Perhaps, or we're getting closer to it. I mean, what I try to do is I say, there are cosmological and epistemological questions that I don't know if I could answer. So I kind of like bring it in a little closer. And I think like in terms of this, if we look at the very narrow range of parameters that we see in our particular solar system, I was about to say about the moon creating this intertidal zone, you know, and if you're, let's say you're geoengineering a planet and you're introducing life into the marine realm, you have to have an ocean, first of all. You introduce life into there, but in order to get the higher life, you have to bring it out onto the land, if that's a requirement, to get higher sentient beings with 1,100 cubic centimeter cranial capacities, able to think and reason and all of the things that go along with our intelligence. You have to go through a certain sequence of
the thing is, the moon helps the sea life, the tides, and how the ocean water moves and everything. If it wasn't for the moon, we would not have all the sea life that we do today either with that. So with the ocean currents and everything like that. So, I mean, it could be instant death without the moon, I think.
Transitional phases.
Could
well,
be wrong,
to get from the ocean onto land would be impossible essentially without an intermediary zone where species could make that transition from an exclusively marine existence to an exclusively terrestrial existence. That's provided by the intertidal zone. You know, even early speculations about the origins of life always went to these, you know, the tide pools that form in the intertidal zone as being the optimum nurturing place for multi-celled life.
You get all sorts of chemical reactions.
Yes,
sort of
yes.
Primordial soup.
But you take the moon away, you got no intertidal zone. And now it's a whole lot trickier to get life from the ocean onto the land.
Right.
Do you think in some ways, you know, maybe we're part of a cosmic war, and that, you know, if you had to describe the two factions sort of very roughly speaking, there's maybe one celestial faction that mines humanity for consciousness, or sort of wants to keep us sort of in the fetal position, or repressed or dumbed down, and maybe a la Roswell, a lot of our internet technology was sort of dropped by these people to distract us constantly, or not people, but beings. And then there's some other, you know, there's some other entities that are maybe, you know, want us to ascend to their level and want us to. So the dichotomy would be described by, like, you know, Antichrist and Armageddon, and you know, on the one hand, you know, the apocalypse, the great unveiling. You see more. And then on the other hand, you know, we're sort of chained to our little cubicles, and we're maybe being mined for something, you know, not you know, unwittingly, if that makes sense.
That's an interesting scenario, and I'm not sure if I necessarily go along with it. You know, I don't rule out the possibility of interstellar contact. I tend to be skeptical about the UFO phenomena being interstellar.
You think it's sort of non-Copernican. You think it's Earth-based. That's what, like, if you talk to Jacques Vallée, he would say that they've been with us for thousands of years, and they're sort of controlling, like, the Earth in many ways is like, you know, they're upping and lowering the thermostat, and they have a control system, and religion has a proto-architecture that maybe these beings have created.
Well, see, that's where my thinking, where I tend to, is not so much these beings as being the other, but basically just being a separate branch of humanity.
So, interesting. Okay, so let's get into that. So, are these the Atlanteans?
Well, there are traditions.
I can tell
going
by
back
his
to
face. I can
the
tell by his
Chaldeans,
face.
to the Sumerians. I mean, I think Rob brought, do we have it right here, the Chaldean account of, I don't know if I could find the passage immediately, but there are references to when, for example, the great catastrophe overwhelmed the earth. The gods.
Is your point that maybe at every civilizational cycle, when there's cataclysm, some subset saves themselves?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. In fact, I think there's a tradition that's been handed down. Now, this is speculative, but I think that one could make pretty strong circumstantial case that there has existed since prehistoric times a tradition about these great cycles and how the planet is subject to periodic catastrophes. Let me. Do
you think we're verging on one now?
Let me put it this way. I think that what happens is, here's the analogy I've used many times. I think it's an appropriate analogy. Suppose you're on a big racetrack and you're in a car, you're driving along, and there's nobody else on the racetrack. Let's say it's a country road and it's a huge, big elliptical highway you're on, and there's nobody on it, right? No traffic. All right, so you're listening to your headphones, you're maybe, texting while you're driving because it's cool. You're going down a country road, nice spacious country road, and there's nobody else on it, right? You don't drive with the same attention and the same type of awareness as you do if you're in rush hour traffic, obviously, right? I love driving on country roads when there's no other traffic and just sitting back, enjoying the scenery, listening to some tunes, maybe, having a Coke now and then, or at least back in the old days. In the old days.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. No, not anymore. That is way back in the old days. But suppose you're driving down the road and up ahead there's an intersection and it's a busy highway that crosses the road you're on, and there's traffic coming and going, or maybe it's one way, they're all going in the same direction. For a little while, when you're crossing that intersection, the probabilities or possibilities of an impact, of having a crash, go up by orders of magnitude. Now, as you're traversing that intersection, at this point, now you need to be cautious. You need to be aware of what you're doing.
See, I really let it. Possibility. This leads us straight into the whole tradition of the Holy Grail.
Yeah. So, what do you think the Holy Grail is? The human heart, or do you think it's something physical and real?
I think it's a very complex. It's an image for a very complex technology of restoration, of regeneration, of rejuvenation, and so on. And that technology can be applied from an individual all the way up to a nation, all the way up to the planet.
And how do you even start to think about the Holy Grail, which feels like an impossible to even conceive of symbol?
Well, you do what I did. I spent like a year or two just diving headfirst into the late 12th, early 13th century Grail romances, from Chrétien de Troyes to Robert de Boron to Wolfram von Eschenbach to Parzival. Exactly. That's what I did.
So that's your prescription to people out there, is dive headlong into the 12th and 13th century.
That's it.
Easy. Yeah.
Or,
do that.
Maybe I'll, part of what I'm trying to do is to provide shortcuts for people.
Yeah.
I have been a student of these things since I was in high school in the late 60s. So I've got, half a century. And, you asked, to me it's just, I don't know, it's just natural. I learn things, I tend to retain things. I have good retention.
You have amazing retention. Like, as good as anybody I know. It's like, it's an eidetic memory. It's insane.
I've been told it's an eidetic memory. I'm definitely not photographic memory. Thank God. I don't think I'd want to be photographic memory. But eidetic is that, I have good retention. What I have is a well-developed storage system and a good retrieval system.
Yeah. Well, I think
although my retrieval system sometimes lapses, and I know that the information is there, I just can't get the drawer open, And then later it'll pop open all by itself. And I go, oh, okay, there we go. Okay, yeah, see, there's my file on the Holy Grail. Let's see who said what. But But yeah, see, I think that the mind is just, it's the same way as any organ of your body. If you use it, it gets stronger, more efficient. If you don't use it, yeah, people tend to, they get out of school and they quit using their brain, and they just, instead of getting smarter through their life, they just get dumber.
I agree. I also think that the mind, though, needs a strong constitution behind it. I think the mind is pre-leveraged by the stomach and by other organs in the body. And if any of those are sort of out of line, the mind can often be very powerful, but if it's not well integrated.
That's like right now, my big challenge is getting back, a decade of the last decade. I've had a pretty tough time in some respects. Injuries. Injuries.
Sorry to hear that.
Oh, well, it's natural.
Yeah.
And, it's being part of being in a human body and doing the kind of work I've done. It was between, construction work and extreme type sports things,
Yeah.
You don't come through that unscathed. And I wouldn't trade it, other than, I've got issues that have slowed me down, and because of that, it's shifted my metabolism. But I have the resources now that I didn't have a few years ago. My business was going like gangbusters when the real estate bubble popped in 2009, 2010, and I went from pretty good income to like very large debts within 1 year, and the dissolution of my company. So I realized then that can have a big effect on you.
Yeah.
It really, it sent me reeling.
Of course.
Created a lot of stress.
Absolutely.
Stress.
Yeah.
And stress can actually be a killer.
Oh, it's really bad.
It is. So I've tried to do things now to de-stress my life.
Good.
And, it's working. I'm struggling to survive for another few millennia.
Let's do it, man.
Yeah.
You'll be in that. So I want to shift gears to Atlantis. The story of Atlantis came from Solon, who was Plato's great uncle. Is that right, or great grandfather?
I think great uncle. I mean, in the lineage, I believe it was Solon to Dropidas to Critias the Elder to Critias the Younger, who then presented the story at the Socratic Forum in Athens.
And Solon got it from Egyptian priests. And
Sonchus, I think, was the name. Was it Crantor who gave the name? I don't remember, but yeah.
And there's a guy named Jimmy Corsetti who was just on Rogan, and and you know Jimmy.
Haven't met him personally, but we've had some great interaction over, digital
things.
Yeah.
And so he's presented a theory that maybe Atlantis existed in the Rishat territory
of Mauritania
in Africa. And I know I've talked to you about this many times for years, have a different theory about maybe an area in the Mid-Atlantic
this
Ridge.
is the thing is that there are pyramids, in a lot of places around the world, China, Asia, South America, and of course, Egypt, etc., and other places, and everything. And one great society copies off another in terms of geometrics and how they make aqueducts, stuff like that, waterways. They copy off each other. This is the same way with Atlantis. I'm dead sure that the original Atlantis is, of course, in the Atlantic. I believe that these sites in Africa they're talking about in other places, even the Mediterranean as well. Say this is Atlantis, and a lot of societies, civilizations copy off each other about what works geometrically and how to get shipping lanes, water lanes, and agricultural lanes of traffic, etc. They copy off each other, and so That's right.
that is
Yeah.
currently underwater.
And I still hold to that. And I've looked at Jimmy's stuff,
Yeah.
and here's what I would say about Jimmy's stuff is that he's done some really interesting work there with the recap structure. There are some parallels that are quite striking.
Yeah.
However, when you break it down and take Plato's detailed accounts, I don't think it applies to the recap structure. And in my presentation that I've done, again, that people can get online. I forgot what we're charging for it. It's pretty affordable, but they can download like an 8 or 9 hour, three part lecture where I break it all down, and I do devote like probably an hour anyway to an analysis.
If
of the
they go
recap.
by Solon Plato, it says out the gates of Hercules and stuff like that. It's in the Atlantic. It's not inside the Mediterranean. It's not in Africa. And I just hate when people take it and they try to go with it and put it somewhere else where it's not. Like I said, society, civilizations copy off of each other.
That's recap structure. I think it's recap. But what I do say is that, according to, again, in my lecture, what I do is I go, okay, what if we just took Plato's details literally? Do they hold up under what we now know about oceanography, geology, marine geology, astronomy, geography, etc.? Does it hold up? Is there a consistency there? And I've read a lot of books on Atlantis and the many places it's been proposed. And in every single case, you have to change the details of Plato's account. Let's say that you accept the island of Terra and the Santorini eruption was the story behind Atlantis. Well, this happened 900 years before Plato, so the assumption is as well Plato made a mistake by a whole order of magnitude in dating. You have to change something. You know, it's been proposed to be southern England, Cuba, Turkey, Antarctica. The list goes on and on.
North America.
North America, yes.
Like
Now,
Graham Hancock sort of implied that in America before.
Yeah, some people say that North America is Atlantis and stuff like that and everything.
I would say, if we take Plato's account as being legitimate to some extent, he's describing a mid-Atlantic island-based empire with sophisticated maritime and navigational skills.
Right.
Well, right there you have the possibility of there being colonies all over the damn place.
Right.
Northwestern Africa would seem like a very obvious place to have outliers, to have colonies.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But why do you think, why is it your base case that it is there in the center of the Atlantic and not?
Well, that's what I get in, and that's why it took me 8 or 9 hours to explain.
Turn that into 2 minutes, Randall.
Because during an Ice Age world, that was one of the most favorable places on the planet for a civilization to evolve. That's why, for many reasons. But, our good friend, our dear friend Rob Reinhardt, that recently visited Atlantis, who, I was hoping maybe we could persuade him to talk a little bit about, but I don't think he wants to, so we're not going to go impose upon Rob at this time. What we'll do is we'll just talk about him as if he wasn't sitting right over there.
I like that. Let's do it. I actually don't like Rob.
You don't?
Oh, shit.
So anyways, I was really excited to hear that our mutual friend Rob recently visited the Azores.
Yeah.
And I think the implication of that is Rob is now going to be integral to this Azores expedition, Azores tour that has kind of been sort of germinating for a couple of years now.
Germinating.
Let's go.
Is that possible, Rob? All right, he's not going to speak, but he is nodding his head.
You don't like Rob, so that's not.
Well, yeah, we should. I would love to go. We should do a follow up where we go to the Azores. That sounds great.
Well,
so it was sort of Climate-wise, it was just optimal. That's the reason that you think it's there. Are there any?
Oh
other
yeah,
reasons?
multiple reasons. It was.
So that's number one. Give me the
multiple.
super high-level summary. I know it's annoying
Yeah,
because you have so
multiple
much unique
reasons,
facts in your
radiation
head.
and stuff
Super
like
high
that.
level. It is
Mobility
from a climate
stuff.
perspective. It's optimal. What else? Number one. Number two.
Well, I mean, okay. So, what I talk about in the 8 or 9 hours is how isostatic adjustment shows that a large that what we're seeing now, those islands are the tops of mountains, sunken mountains.
Interesting.
And I get into the evidence for that. I mean, I show that the dredging of the ocean floor, the core samples, the findings of submerged shorelines and things. There's a very strong case.
Because the map looked entirely different.
Yeah.
It's like the map of Piri Reis, where you have the
Yep.
sort of tropical parts of Antarctica that are shown, at the top. Yeah.
The Orontius Phineas that shows parts of Antarctica. Yeah, I mean, and Graham makes the case that's never been refuted,
With
which
no
is
ice,
that
no snow,
this
animals.
knowledge of geography comes from some past cultures
civilization.
that had the ability to navigate the world.
Okay, so optimal climate for living.
That's
number
where
one.
some ETs come in. It's like how they have the map of the world, Antarctica. It's like you can't have a map of these places without being able to see stuff from space. You can't make it that accurate, these land masses. And even, Antarctica, you can't do that, thousands upon thousands of years ago. That didn't have ice, not animals, stuff like that. You can't do that without being able to see it from space. And there's all these maps of these different places that don't exist. So
number two.
Well, now you've got
these mountain
access because you're
structures are underwater.
strategically poised, where you've got access to Africa, Europe, North America, and South America.
So all the land masses.
So now, if you're interacting with people, resources, all of these kinds of things, you're strategically placed where you've got fairly regular access. I mean, literally, it took Columbus 6 weeks to sail.
Yeah.
All right. That means that if you're poised on a large island or island complex in the mid-Atlantic, you're 3 weeks of sailing to Africa and Europe, 3 weeks of sailing to North and South America.
Yep.
And now you've got access to all of those resources.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. It seems to me that for multiple reasons that would have
It's
been an ideal place for a civilization to evolve when sea levels were lowered by 400 feet and the mid-Atlantic ridge was probably 1,000 to 2,000 feet higher than it is now.
A lot of esoteric traditions talk about involution as opposed to evolution. And there are rumors that maybe in the past, in past civilizations, hominids have been giant. And we've found sort of possibly giant bones. Graham Hancock has talked about this.
Right.
Yeah.
What say you?
Well, I would say that I've never seen a giant skeleton myself, but I've taken some pretty deep dives into some of the actually archival stuff.
Yeah.
The
I've
Emory
seen
Library,
stuff,
where I
but
used to
haven't
do
seen
a lot of research, has an incredible collection of 19th century writings, state archives, and records of, early archaeology, the Bureau of the American Ethnological Society, the early Smithsonian papers. There's an incredible wealth of stuff in there. And in fact, in one of my presentations, which I've not yet presented in a public forum, I pulled a lot of that stuff together. The excavations, particularly associated with the monumental earthworks, giant skeletons. Those accounts are repeated over and over and over again. That in the excavation there's a giant skeleton dug up, sometimes 7 feet, sometimes 8, sometimes even 9 feet in height. Now, these accounts, of course, the skeptics say, oh, these were just hoaxes and made up. And
I don't believe it.
Maybe in some cases, yes. But look, there was no internet, so for somebody to get, 10,000 likes, if they went and said that they discovered it's going to be Dr. So-and-so and Reverend So-and-so that's out there excavating with a group of local townspeople witnessing the excavation, and they dig up an 8-foot skeleton. I'm just not buying that you can just dismiss that and throw it out of hand with a hoax.
Well, if you think about the trajectory of mankind now, it feels like we're moving from, if we were wolves in the past, we're turning into dogs. And we're being domesticated, and whether it's sperm count or testosterone, so on a human kind of body hormonal level, and then probably size of body as well. It's like this has become vestigial. We're not hunter-gatherers anymore. You're not. That's not being selected
have all the muscle
anymore. And so, do you think? Yeah, I mean, you think about sort of these possible large hominid creatures in the past, and then there are a lot of traditions that talk about demigods, titans. In the Book of Enoch, you had the Watchers that mated.
There
with
were giants
mankind.
in the earth in those days.
Giants in the earth. Do you ascribe to possibly, any of the theories that ancient alien astronauts might have come down, co-mated with mankind, and we are their descendants?
That's kind of a sticky question.
Let me just say, I think about every human. And there's something very depraved about them. It's like we're very ape-like in some ways, and then we do have sort of this divine spark in other ways. We feel wholly separate from the rest of the animal kingdom, and yet also sort of a part of it. And so I've wondered about, this theory as a possible way to explain.
Perhaps, I'm very open-minded. I certainly don't sit here and claim I've got final answers on all of this stuff. I don't know if I can't even say that I wish I did, because half the fun of life is figuring this stuff out, the journey of discovery, the mystery. But I do think that as you go along and you think about this, you study, you learn, you meditate, you contemplate, you do discover answers to some of the questions. There are mysteries, and then there are greater mysteries and lesser mysteries. The ultimate mystery, I don't know. I tend to be agnostic about that. I will say in a more pragmatic sense, though, that when we go back to the late Ice Age, when we go back to the late Pleistocene, I mean, my God, look, the imperial mammoth stood 16 feet tall at the shoulder. The American Pleistocene lion was the size of a horse. Glyptodonts were armadillos the size of Volkswagen Beetle cars, of golf carts. I mean, the list goes on. The giant cave bear, the Ursus spalaeus, the bear that stood 6 feet tall at the shoulder and 12 feet tall when it stood up on its hind legs. There were giants, right? If there were all of these giant, the Irish elk with 10 and 12 foot antler spans, for Christ's sakes, 8 foot tall at the shoulder. Can you imagine encountering one of those things? Talk about an impressive beast there. But if you had all of these mammalian megafauna, oversized compared to today, why not people?
Well, also, how would you survive in that context if you weren't mega-sized?
You had to be awful smart.
You had to be awful smart. And then you have all this megalithic architecture that 10, 20, 30
Scavengers
and I think that gets us into the technological discussion. And because of the things that I've been learning lately, I think I'm honing in on what that technology was that they were using.
The thing is, our ancestors back then, they had much more, muscle and everything. We could see a lot better than we could see now. How we were in those days is a lot different. So,
and we could do another discussion on that. To attempt to do that now would be premature, because there's still holes in my game, and I don't necessarily have all the pieces together. But my instincts tell me that, we have to be looking at these plasmoid technologies. Could provide the answer to things like levitation of large stones.
It's interesting. I mean, an area I've always been interested in is the study of parapsychology, which is, the idea that there's some sort of mind over matter effect.
There is.
And to be honest, it's a very poorly assembled group of people and work, and it's often not rigorous, and it was definitely marginalized, and it was chronically sort of underfunded and didn't really go anywhere, and there were sort of scaling problems to it. It was hard to sort of instrumentalize. And yet, if you look at some of those, albeit somewhat small scale studies, I'm convinced, if you look at the actual data, that there is a weak mind over matter effect, and the ability to cultivate that maybe, is that's an interesting question. Can that be cultivated? And there are biblical references to things like that. Maybe Jesus was the ultimate parapsychology practitioner.
Yeah.
Have you ever had what you would think of as a parapsychological experience?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
He was ascended, yeah.
Something you talk about, or?
Yeah, I've had many. Well,
I haven't had many. I've had a few.
Ascended, yeah.
Well, parapsychological, I mean, I've seen UFOs, so I don't know if that's I think that's
it could be.
I think
on one level, maybe there is a parapsychological component to the UFO phenomenon.
I think there absolutely is. But then, as far as like seeing, something levitate or something, like engaging in telekinetic powers or.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some weird. Okay, the parapsychological stuff I've experienced is calling things very early, like predicting things in bizarre ways. Not even coming from my conscious intellectual mind, but it's like it gets zapped into me, and I experience like a premonition or something, which I think a lot of people have experienced.
Yes, I have too. I've had a few things that have been, you could dismiss them as coincidence. I think when I was about 18 or 19, my best friend from high school that I worked with and his older brother were out somewhere, and I was home sleeping, and I had this intense dream that they were in trouble and got busted, to the point where it woke me up, and it was about 2 a.m. And the next morning I go to call my friend, and I couldn't get a hold of him, and it turns out that at 2 a.m. him and his brother got busted for dope, and they were sitting in jail. Now, how the hell, that always struck me, that was bizarre.
Yeah.
That I actually had this dream.
Yeah.
It woke me up, and then that was just a dream. I went back to sleep, and then the next day I find out that literally right around the time I had that dream and woke up, they had gotten pulled over and got busted for dope.
Well, it's interesting. Scientists are now saying that quantum computers can send information back in time. And we know that there's temporal non-locality in entanglement. If you have photon A and photon B, if you measure photon A in the future, it affects photon B in the past, which is pretty awesome and interesting. And so maybe, there's this concept of the long body, and we experience anamnesis when we're ported into the limited prism of our physical body, and maybe we can glitch into the long body and access it's almost like pre-memory, our future cognitive knowledge, our future state, through some sort of quantum system, which is very interesting. And people have tried to find literal physical analogs or physical explanations for what could be that quantum sensor. And there's a guy named Stuart Hameroff who thinks that it's the microtubules in the brain. And I don't know if that's exactly right, but that could explain some of this sort of the premonition stuff.
I think I would agree with that.
To me, it's obvious that the human brain and body is not a classical computer. And people like Turing, who've suggested that in the past, I think you're sending people into a cul-de-sac with this whole AI thing.
This leads me into the whole concept of quantum entanglement. That somehow there is something that, there's some level that transcends time and space as we know it. And interestingly, this seems to be one of the implications that is coming out of plasma physics when you're dealing with, things on the atomic and subatomic level. And this is something I'm, very much in the infancy of learning about. But I showed you the slideshow that I put to you, 240 slides over the last 3 months to help me. Well, it's doing two things. One, it served for me to learn about the system, the methodology, the philosophy, the ideas, but it's also going to be used to present by the leading scientists of this system to various entities around the world that have already shown an interest in implementing the technology.
Do you think that the military-industrial complex is hiding any knowledge around fundamental parapsychology? And the reason I ask, the reason I ask is because Ben Rich, who is the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, on his deathbed, said we have the ability to go to the stars whenever we want, and we've built it. And the journalist asked him, well, how do we do that? And he goes, well, have you heard of ESP? And the journalist goes, yes. And then he goes, well, that's how. And then there's a guy named Bob John, who was a plasma physicist, who worked at Boeing, who then went on to run the Princeton Paralab, the parapsychology lab. And so I think about that, connection as well, where he's working at Boeing, and then he on plasma, and then he goes on to work on sort of parapsychology. And I wonder if there is an interesting connection there. And I think about the modern UFO story, and it's usually trying to push people away from thinking about parapsychology and towards more kind of nuts and bolts materialist reductionist explanations of how the craft works. And in fact, a lot of people say when the crafts crash, there's nothing inside the craft. So
this is the thing, is that our government wants everything industrialized, and anything that has to do with parapsychology or ESP, psionics, psychic abilities, they want to keep that to themselves and keep it weaponized, because they don't want ordinary people to be able to go over the government, to be able to communicate and go over government channels. They want to keep us on the computers, they want to keep us on the phones, where they can track us and everything else. And they got their own psychic spies and stuff like that. I can spy in Iran. Sometimes I'd be able to do that. In other places, I can remote view places as well, and see things, and everything. So, I have, some, adult stars that I know of. I've been able to know what they're doing. There's that connection. I know they're having a bad day as well. And when they're feeling bad, we're going through tough times. I could just feel that and stuff. And I can see them. I can see what they're doing sometimes. Movement, stuff like that. And everything. So
there must be an interface between the mind of the occupants of the craft and the craft itself. And so it has to be somewhat parapsychological from that perspective. I think it's parapsychological from the viewer's perspective of the craft as well. And it feels like that's the thing that's been stigmatized and marginalized.
It's the soul.
You don't want people thinking about parapsychology. You'd rather them think about, speed of light limits and physics.
Right. Which takes us into a realm that's probably beyond our time frame tonight.
Wow. Well, let's eat, because we're gonna miss dinner, and we gotta go to your restaurant.
And I'm getting hungry.
Yeah.
I've worked up an appetite.
Same, man. Yeah. Randall Carlson.
Jesse Michaels.
This is the best opening of all time, man.
I fast forward those because this is his content as well, but anomalies. This catastrophes and try this. Wow. I actually need to eat in some ways myself. But let's see here.
I consider you a really good friend at this point. We always have amazing phone conversations.
We do. I consider you a good friend as well.
Well, thanks, man. We need more people like you in the world. 2 years ago, I went to Decatur, Atlanta, and we did an interview. We did a sit down, and I felt like I was kind of low energy, and we never put it out, but it was like this amazing 2-hour thing. And a lot of it was around how the moon is possibly this anomalous, alien spacecraft.
Well, now you're giving away secrets, but it's okay. She's an insider.
So we were talking about how the moon might be this anomalous, object.
I get too many reports from people in intelligence, remote viewers, and astronauts saying that there was structures on the moon, Mars, etc. that need to be investigated, and they can't go into Buzz Aldrin and stuff like that. And that's because there was civilizations there. They have all these structures, pyramids, stuff like that. And there is credence to say that a lot of the moon could be, hollowed out from other civilizations, ETs using that as a base of operations. There's too much UFO activity on the moon for there not to be some type of big base or bases, I'd say.
Conventional explanation for how it formed, that an asteroid hit the Earth and it formed this perfect, sphere. You never see the dark side, sort of just rotates around us. And then there are all these sort of ancient myths that involve a pre-moon period, right? And the moon actually kind of settled the tides or whatever, pre-Younger Dryas period. So and then you found some really interesting anomalies when it comes to the moon as well, right?
Oh yeah. I don't necessarily think that there is a record of humans witnessing a time when there was no moon. There could have been a time that there was no moon.
I don't remember
if we accept the capture theory, which was one of the three dominant theories up until the impact theory gained dominance. We had the capture theory, the sister theory, and the daughter theory. Those were the three. All three of them have problems, but the capture theory has, the idea there is, you have to somehow, it's coming from somewhere else, and it gets trapped into this orbit around the Earth.
Right.
But the capture window is so small, it'd be almost like we're trying to shoot a dime that's a mile away with a rifle. Something like that. I mean, the capture window is extremely small, and it's because of the mathematical problems that theory has not gained much credibility. But what they did is they kind of combined several theories that you had in order to get the chemical ratios and the isotopic ratios and the differences between the moon and the Earth's composition and the similarities. That was essentially the problem. So you had to concoct up this theory that it was hit by a large object, maybe as big as Mars, and that would have caused this spewing out into space of all of this debris. And then eventually this debris would have formed a ring around the Earth, and then it would have consolidated into the moon that we see today. I have seen, and I'm certainly not prepared to get into the technicalities of it, but I've seen some pretty exhaustive treatments of the mathematics of just that, and it's extremely challenging to get from a ring of debris around the Earth to the moon that we see today.
Yep.
It's one thing to say, okay, here's a big impact, stuff gets thrown out, forms
it
a ring.
Blown up our planet
but now
as well.
to get from that ring to the moon that we have today with all of its unique features, that gets problematic.
So how do we explain, because it's amazing, when you look into your work and Robert Bauval's work, Graham Hancock, all these people, Robert Schoch, John Anthony West, it seems very apparent that you have all this archaeology that's far older than we date it to, and that maybe the pyramids, for example, are much older than we think. Maybe the Sphinx at Giza, actually there's limestone water damage on it, there's erosion on it, which would imply not this like desert temperature. And so what do you think about when they were built? Like, is there sort of a positive version of that theory? Because I think what I find frustrating is it's clear, the negative thing is clear. It's clear that archaeology is wrong and that our history is much older than meets the eye. But
I've been watching the History Channel out. There's a prehistory part of the pyramids before, of course, the main ones that goes back 8,000 years, 9,000 years, stuff like that, before Christ and everything. And this is something like on History Channel or something like that. And that's the kind of networks that don't put out just bullshit and everything. Just real educational stuff. So, I mean, there's a lot of history that's also being censored as well.
Actually date any of these things. Obviously you can't date stone, but can we approximate when these things were built and what society built them?
Well, one thing you can do though with stone is you can use luminescence dating, which I'm not going to try to get into a technical explanation of how that works, but basically if you have a piece of stone. Like, let's say in the Sphinx, you've got this body of the Sphinx, and then you've got this, it's literally was a quarry around it, right? Have you been there?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you know then that the Sphinx is actually, the body of the Sphinx is below the grade of, of the ground level.
Yeah.
The head is above, but if you look at those walls, right? So before those stones were quarried, that was all underground, and it was not accessible by cosmic ray bombardment. However, once you've removed the rocks and exposed it to the air, to the sun, to the air, to whatever, now the cosmic ray bombardment causes spallation, which creates isotopes, which then can be, by counting the isotopes, you can date it. And I'm not going to try to explain it all without a little bit of having prepared myself for it. But optically stimulated luminescence, you can date how long a stone has been exposed to the environment.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I don't know why nobody has really undertaken
So
that.
have we dated any of these things? Like, for
Not
example,
that I know of.
Well, why don't we do that? We have to figure that out. If there is some sort of method that allows us to date, because I think where, I love all the people I just mentioned, but like where you can poke holes with Graham Hancock is, or any of these people's work is, it's clear these things are older, but when can you date them to, and when exactly were they built? And if he's trying to win in his arguments against the Ministry of Culture and Hawass and stuff, then like it's very important that they have sort of smoking gun proof, and if you can get that smoking gun proof, it would be great.
Like, let's take the Sphinx for example.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there, I've seen it, I've studied rock weathering, I've studied limestone weathering in the field. I'm convinced that it is water erosion. Well, then what you have to do is turn to other fields of science to determine when there would have been enough water to do the erosion.
Yeah.
The erosion.
What's the date
see,
when there was
the
water?
Sphinx itself, the body of the Sphinx has been subjected to these restoration campaigns. So now there is, are you looking at a original piece of the Sphinx, or are you looking at a later part of a restoration campaign? You dispel all of that when you're looking at the Sphinx ditch, right? Because nobody's done a restoration campaign against that west wall of the Sphinx ditch. So what you've got there is pretty much the pristine erosion that happened after those blocks were removed, right? And those blocks were removed using I imagine, typical, separation trenches, cutting them loose, moving them out. And typically, if you look at a quarry wall that has been even modern, that uses modern technologies and industrial processes to remove the blocks, you'll have this kind of stepped profile. And there's a lot of Old Kingdom quarries, limestone quarries along the Nile that are supposedly about the same age as the Sphinx, but you can look at the walls of them and you can literally pick out the chisel marks in the walls, the pick marks, and in the Sphinx ditch you would assume that would be there, but there are places where the surface profile has been eroded back over 2 feet. So you've had 2 feet of limestone material removed. Now we go to another scientific discipline, and we can look at climate change in Egypt, and we can tell, for example, not we, but the scientists that have been studying it can tell when there was like lots of rainfall in Egypt. And this has been documented independently by numerous researchers, that there was copious rainfall during the transition out of the Ice Age. And freshwater mussels and other remnants of animals that live in the Nile have been found 120 to 150 feet above the present day floodplain of the Nile. So what that means is that water, if it's 120 to 150 feet above the modern floodplain, would easily submerge the Sphinx underwater. Now, secondly, if you go to the east, back up, go to the west, you're looking at an upslope gradient. There's evidence of massive hydraulic movements of water across that, which would have also submerged the Giza Plateau. Now, the dating of when that occurred is usually given as around 12,000 years. So I was already aware of that dating when I first encountered the work of John Anthony West, the late John Anthony West, who was basing his work upon an insight that he got from Schwaller de Lubitsch, who first proposed that the Sphinx was water eroded and therefore had to be much older than Old Kingdom Egypt, because it's been desert there since Old Kingdom Egypt. And so what I did is I undertook studies of limestone erosion.
Yes, that's why they say it has to be a lot older, because of water and everything, unless they're both wrong. Unless they're wrong about the water range, which it could be. It definitely could be. They could be wrong too about, because there was more lush life. I believe it could be the other way around. But
different environmental and energetic circumstances to try to determine various scenarios of how the erosion of the Sphinx and the ditch, the quarry. I primarily focused on the quarry walls rather than the ditch itself, for the reasons I explained just a minute ago. And what I came up with was pretty amazing, because, for example, gravestones those are really useful for determining erosion rates of different kinds of rock. There are many, many gravestones that were like, see, the thing is when you put that gravestone into the ground and it's the date of the person that died, well, that's the date at which that gravestone was now. So if you had it 1850, somebody who died, I live next to a cemetery that has pre-Civil War dates in it. And you can look at some of those gravestones and they're very eroded. Some of them you can't even read the inscriptions on them anymore. So the idea is that if you have a gravestone, you put it in the ground, that date of death on that gravestone is going to be pretty much the date that gravestone was now set out there and exposed. So you're okay, well, if this was 1850 or 1870 or whatever, you now can know how long this has been sitting in the environment, subjected to the rain and the wind and the weathering. So that's one way you study. The other way is there have been, like on limestone cliffs that are next to a highly energetic intertidal zone where the surf, like you see out there, is washing up against the cliff. Okay, so let's say that, so here's what some researchers have done. They've come in, they've drilled a hole into the side of the cliff.
I think I cut it right here. I've got quite a bit of this. I fast forward a good amount, but this is deviating from other stuff I want to cover. I can see crap tube. I had a lot. I had three on some of my tabs. I had like 3 to 5 different videos to cover. This new crap tube just erases them. And a force update, I lost over 100 tabs. With that, that's stuff I need. So F them on that. Anyways, hope everyone has a good morning, good night, wherever you are. Take care, leave a like, comment, and peace out.